Sikhi is like a flower, and the only way it's going to flourish is with the blood of the Shaheeds. When saying, "Oh, Shaheediyan paun da sama aa gaya," and he basically takes a lot of his dastard, covers his eye, which had come out, and then he bravely kind of fought. And
after contributing like 85% to the azadi of this very nation, we are a second-class citizen.
You as a Sikh now are subjugated under martyred till that realization happens. And how can you fight for azadi?
They were trying to do this way before Sant even got into the Darbar Sahib. Even at 1981, they wanted to issue tanks because they were in Naurad Singato Darasiga. Indira Gandhi tried to order tanks to facilitate the arrest of Sant.
The state wanted to prove a point by attacking Akaal Takht. They were just waiting for the right opportunity. The state is actually playing a game. ਜੇ ਇੱਕ ਹੋਮ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਆਪਣੀ ਕੰਟਰੀ 'ਚ ਖੁੱਲ੍ਹੇਆਮ ਡਿਸਕ੍ਰਿਮੀਨੇਸ਼ਨ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ ਹੈ, ਪਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਗੱਲ ਇਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਵਾਂ ਤੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਐਂਟੀ ਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਬਣਾ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ. If a Hindu commits a crime, it's kind of like some community issue. But if Sikh does anything to defend himself, then it becomes terrorism. This kind of psyche is still very valid.
Of course, Sant Jarnail Singh Ji is innocent. Of course, they've demonized Sikhs and they've demonized Sikh characters. And of course, the state has not failed. It's purposely failed. There's been more interviews by national and international press of Sant Jarnail Singh Ji at Akaal Takht alone than the current sitting Indian Prime Minister. He's allowed no free press. Nobody gets to ask him any questions, domestic or internationally. More people ask Sant Jarnail Singh Ji questions.
His first huge support base was women.
Less alcoholics, less abusive relationships. These are like samajik issues that Sant Jarnail Singh Ji is tackling.
He was fully like samarpan to Guru. There was no dunyavi like pressure or whatever. This individual who's a young man, like in his early 30s when he becomes Jathedar of the Taksal, is able to outmaneuver like people that have been in Piri Dar Piri like politics, like the Akali Dal, like for generations.
That Bindar is the most powerful man in Punjab. Whatever he says goes.
Welcome back to this special podcast series, a 4-part series where we are remembering June 1984 and marking 40 years. We've got 4 guests. Good Gidpa. We went through part 1. So if you haven't checked out part 1, make sure you guys do. There's a link to it, maybe on the screen or in the description as well. Part 1 covered from the Guru's era, from 1469 all the way up to 1708, the era of our Gurus. And then post that era as well, talking about 1849 up to 1947 as well. We talked about the Siddharthic foundations of Sikhi and talking about how everything that we're going to be speaking about in these next podcasts, how it all traces back to the period of our Guru Sahiban and all of our philosophies and, all the Sikhi, all the Upadesh, it all comes from that time. And, our guests did a great job of explaining that in so much detail. And in the last podcast, we pretty much got up to, from 1947, the split of India into India and Pakistan at that time, and getting up to 1978. And I guess the main crux of this podcast, if you watch the last one, is going to be speaking about 1978, going all the way up to 1983, just before 1984, and the attacks in June 1984. So let's get straight into it. Let's come on to this topic of 1978. And Hanji, Baljit Singh Ji, would you like to start us off?
So the 13th of April 1978, there's a huge Sukha that happens, which culminates in the Shaheedi of 13 Sikh. So just before that, we need to talk about the Nirankaris itself. In the last episode, we did speak about them and how that they were a government-sponsored cult. Initially, the Nirankaris, the Sant Nirankari Mandal, was an offshoot of an original group, which were actually more pro-Sikh. And this offshoot was a cult, it was a pure cult, with no dharam or any kind of religious or philosophy or anything like that. Following the partition that we spoke about, the Nirankaris then this group settled in Delhi. And the key part of why they were sponsored by the state, they grew from a tiny organization to having like 300 chapters across India. All of their people were like the ambassadors, or any of their kind of dignitaries were given a lot of state recognition. So the government of India made sure that like even foreign embassies would treat them. They would have diplomatic passports. So, and the reason why the Indian government backed the Nirankaris, the reason why they sponsored them, the same kind of reasons that we were talking about in the previous podcast, which was that the Khalsa aspect of Sikhi had to be diluted. So it wasn't a case of sometimes we kind of trivialize it and say they don't like Sikhi or they don't like Sikhs. But the reason why the Nirankaris was sponsored and supported by the government. There was an investigative journalist called Satpal Baggi who published a piece shortly after the Saka, and in there he had like some government sources, and he unveiled what this contractual agreement was with the Home Ministry and the Nirankaris. And essentially what they wanted the Nirankaris to do, because they had Sikh Roop and stuff, was to dilute the Khalsa identity of the Sikh. And the reason why was that just before 78, we have the state of emergency in 75. So for 2 years, Indira Gandhi, who was found guilty of election fraud, declared a state of emergency in which 140,000 people were arrested. Over a third of those were Sikh. And during the state of emergency, Sant Jarnail Singh took out 38 Nagar Kirtans in direct protest because they had banned the assembly of 5 people. So in direct protest of that, Sant Jarnail Singh Ji Bindrawale took out 38 Nagar Kirtans to say that obviously we don't respect your laws and your kind of orders or whatever. And the Akali Dal and Sikhs in general were like the biggest, most vocal critics and demonstrate against this. And from, obviously we know the Punjabi Subha movement, that Indira Gandhi and obviously her father Nehru, they were opposed to any sort of like Sikh identity, Khalsa identity. So that's what the Nirankaris were set up specifically to do. And that's why on Vaisakhi in Amritsar in 1978, the Nirankaris took out a huge jalus, a massive procession, in which their fake guru, Gurbachana, was seated as a guru, and all the chors vi hunda siga, like, and it was on that day in Amritsar that he declared that he was going to be establishing Sat Sitare. So it was in challenge to Guru Sahib, say that he created 5 Panj Pyare, I'm going to create Sat Sitare. And as they went through Amritsar, they had loudspeakers and they were like saying lots of things against the Sikh Dharam. And this shows the kind of the halat of the Qawm at the time. That obviously following partition, we've got to remember that the emergencies just happened. We've had the Punjabi Subha that's happened, and partition has happened. So we were already fully, reeling from the effects of those things on us. And the halat, the condition of the Qawm at the time was that a cult like the Nirankaris could go through Amritsar on Vaisakhi and say these things about the Khalsa. And obviously the Akalis were in government at this time, and because they had like a fragile partnership with the Jan Sangh or the Janata Party in Delhi, they had to kind of go ahead with it as well. So they allowed this to happen. They gave the permission for this to happen. And because of the state sponsorship, lots of Nirankaris were in top government positions, like the DC of Amritsar was actually a Nirankari himself, and he was speaking at the event that was held. And then when Sant Jarnail Singh Ji finds out that this is happening, he's at this time at Metta, Gurdwarshan Prakash at Metta, and he then rushes to Amritsar, goes to Darbar Sahib, and then confronts the revenue minister, the Akali revenue minister, Umran Angal, who was there, and saying, listen, you need to speak to the DC, the district commissioner, and get this closed down now. But like, we're not going to bardash this kind of biadvi. And then he didn't do anything about it. There was a bit of a chagara with him and Sant Ji. And then Sant Ji sends a message through Bhai Kesar Singh to Ajit Nagar, where the Akhan Kirtani Jatha were having their Vaisakhi Smagam. And when that message was read out on stage, and the message was obviously that the Nirankaris have, Guru Di Nagari vich aake Vaisakhi din te Khalsa Sejane Divas te, they're doing this, and we need to like stop this. And Bhai Fauja Singh Ji, who was in the Langar hall, in the Langar at the time, like gunning atta and doing seva, he hears this message and comes forward, and then he basically says to Sangatana, like, at this point, like men and women, women and children need to stay behind, but like when I step forward, just consider that you're potentially not going to be coming home and stuff.
Right. You mentioned quite a lot of names there on events, which is great. You talk about Indira Gandhi, you talk about this emergency, and there's a lot of content. Even in Sant Ji's speeches, they speak about that, and a plane being hijacked. Did you want to touch upon these points as well? What is that about, just to give that context as well?
During the emergency, planes were hijacked for Indira in support, and the people that did that, they got seats.
Yeah.
हाँ जी.
I mean, one thing to mention here is after this emergency ended in 77, in Indira Gandhi's and his party, her party in Indian National Congress got absolutely lashed in the voting results. I think they won the minimum seats. They were not even a healthy opposition. And Indira was very agitated that Sikhs have actually played a lot of role in speaking against us during emergency. So ਉਹਦੇ ਮਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਬਦਲੇ ਦੀ ਭਾਵਨਾ ਉਦੋਂ ਤੋਂ ਉੱਭਰ ਰਹੀ ਸੀ. But she was out of power until 1980s. So 78 happens when in Punjab is Akali Dal government and in center is Janta Party government. Janta Party is not the BJP or Jan Sangh. It was a different kind of party having loose affiliations with Jan Sangh. And then later on it became BJP, which is Bharatiya Janata Party, which is ruling India now. So at that time, the so-called Panthak Sarkar is there, which never banned this Nirankari cut, because all the Sikhs, they knew about their wrongdoings, what they were doing, what they were saying about the Sikh Panth, what they were saying about the Dasampita, and how they were disgracing our very mool siddhants of Panj Pyare and everything. So this Akali government was basically actually covering them, giving them security, giving them everything. And once the whole Sukha happens, he was actually escorted with government security outside Punjab to Delhi, so that no harm can happen to him. So this tells you a lot. This tells you a lot what Akali Dal, where was it standing in terms of the political ambition, because they were hungry for power and everything. And then what happened on, imagine you can listen on the loudspeaker in Darbar Sahib what they were saying, against your Guru Sahib, and you're sitting in Darbar Sahib. And I think Paji will take care of the rest of the Sakhi.
And just, I forgot to mention as well that before 78, there'd been numerous clashes with the Nirankaris and Guru Sikhs, essentially from the Khan Kirtan Jatha and the Dam Dam Taksal. At that time, it was Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, and it was actually during that phase of opposing the Nirankaris that Sant Jarnail Singh actually passes away in a car crash. And the interesting thing is that when Sant Jarnail Singh passes away in hospital, and I think they were like, either they were leaving the hospital, but Sant Jarnail Singh Ji and the other things, I think they were carrying the sarup of Sant Jarnail Singh, that it was a Nirankari there who actually taunted them, because they obviously didn't like Sant Jarnail Singh, and they said that like, I'm not going to go into what they said, but they taunted him, and obviously because of the kind of mahal, like they had to stay quiet and they left there. But although obviously Sant that they had this virodh, so they had they had numerous clashes with the Nirankaris before, but this time when they came to Amritsar, this was a premeditated kind of massacre. So because what they did is they did this obviously blasphemous march, and then they were prepared with, they had like they called it the Seva Dal, the Nirankaris, that they had like a paramilitary organization which had 7,000 recruited like armed kind of men, and they were like gazetted officers. They had like a fully like military structure. So Sant Jarnail Singh Ji sends the message, Bhai Fauja Singh and other Jatha Singhs come to Darbar Sahib, where they meet Sant Jarnail Singh Ji and the other members of the Taksal. They have a meeting and they decide what they're going to do about this. And they said that, look, we're going to go Shantmay and we're going to protest this. Essentially, we're going to tell the DC, or we're going to like tell these guys that we're not going to allow this to continue, and we're not going to Bardash, obviously this whole thing needs to be closed down. At this time, it wasn't in the mind of many people that this clash was going to be a lot different to the previous clashes. So much so that obviously some of the Guru Sikhs from the Jatha had come that Darbar Sahib, so they went. When they then get to, as they're marching to where obviously this Nirankari a cut is happening, they're doing like they're reciting Gurbani, they're reciting like Biras Shabads and things. And then they get stopped there by the police, and they said to the police, listen, we can see the pandal, we can see what's happening, we can hear what they're saying as well, and they're doing like Biadvi of Guru Sahib, and they're talking against Guru Sahib, that you need to stop this because we're not going to bardash this. So, and what it was all a ruse. Like there was the police were complicit in this, so they had held them there while the paramilitary were getting ready, And then all of a sudden, they attacked the Gursikhs, the Sikh. It was about 150, 200 Sikhs that were there. Mostly just like Shastra, like Usi, Kirtan, but no one was like armed with anything more than that. And then in this attack, they get the police turn on them as well. So there's an Inspector Joshi who actually unloads his revolver into Paisab, which is why he had like a huge crater. And then this huge battle breaks out between the Singhs and like the Nirankaris. The Nirankaris are armed with rifles, pistols, acids, glass bottles, and they're like literally raining on the Singhs. And they were kind of trapped. It was a trap essentially. So the Singhs valiantly fight, and Bhai Fauja Singh's actually pushing people away and saying, like kind of cover yourselves kind of thing. But when things got like really out of hand, then Bhai Sahib says that Hun Singh us Shaheediyan paun da sama aa gaya. And he basically takes a lot of his dastar, covers his eye, which had come out, and then he bravely kind of fought, and utte ਫਿਰ 13 ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਨੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀਆਂ ਪਾਈਆਂ.
I think about Bhai Fauja Singh. Bhai Fauja Singh has its own history. Coming into Sikhi, setting up the Khalsa farm. Basically, essentially, he was giving miri-piri training there, Gatka and everything. Even some Gore attended that Khalsa farm where all this was happening. I have this information from one of his college mate. He wrote a letter, and that his college mate lives here in Derby. He wrote a letter to him in 76 saying, "Shaheediyan da sama aun lagya te sir te kafan ban ke tu wapas aa ja ithe." So the Singhs very much knew what was coming their way. They very much knew how the government is reacting. So what, like if you listen to Sant Ji's 81 speeches, they were hinting plainly what's going to happen in 84, clearly, because they knew what this is eventually going to happen. So I think Bhai Fauja Singh is, along with the other Singhs, he got Shaheed there, but Bhai Fauja Singh was a lot of inspiration behind the guerrilla war that happened after the 84 as well. So he was the kind of like the main lead, because all the Singhs that were in contact with him during the Khalsa farm later on became the Jujaru Singhs who fought for the Sikhi tradition and obviously for our Azad Khitta as well afterwards.
And what about this Rehansabai that took place on that day as well? You mentioned this offline earlier.
That's correct. Just about the Khalsa farm as well. Bhai Fauja Singh, before the Saka, we were talking about this earlier actually, that when the Saka happens, he was actually on bail for a previous Panthic morcha that he had done, where he had Chatkara Dusht, and he was in jail for that. He was just, even within the jail, a lot of the pictures we see of Bhai Sahib where he's speaking and standing, it's at a Samagam that was held in Gurdaspur jail in 77. They organised like an Amrit Sanchar, a Rehansabai Kirtan utte bhi hoi si, and even I think they was in the jailer like took Amrit as well. Right. So one of the inna pravasi guy, right? So one of the shakhsiyat there, like, I can't do justice to it, but like even with the Khalsa farm, they had this desire and this one of the visions. Obviously one of the, like, there was such a like Nama Biasi Gursikh that they could see what was coming. So their intentions were to try and prepare the Qawm for what was coming. I think it was Bhai Ramma Singh Ji who went to the Fasakhi Samagam in 78 as well, had stayed with Bhai Fauja Singh Ji the night before. And all jada galbaat ke vichar kiti si Gursikhane, and they said to Bhai Ramma Singh Ji that like alongside like prachar and stuff, that Sikhi is like a flower, and the only way it's going to flourish is with the blood of the Shaheeds. So don't pata siga that this was going to happen, and this is why like following the Sakka, you were saying about the Rehansabai. So on the 13th of April, there's a Rehansabai at the Samagam at Manji Sahib. And as the Rehansabai is going on through the night, they are announcing the names of the Shaheeds. So because obviously the bodies had like gone to the hospital, and they were announcing the names of the Shaheeds. And as the Rehansabai Kirtan is going all night, and even the Gursikhane Amrit Chakya si at the Samagam, they were told like that when you get home now, you have to go and prepare yourself, get arms, get a pistol, and that's part of your retana, like the Panth's under attack and stuff. So it was a really, really like a gambhir but also chardi kala kind of incident.
Yeah, and on Bhai Fauja Singh being on bail, for me, that when I learned that fact, like that was really kind of significant for me and eye-opening. And obviously, I held them in like a high esteem before, but like the way they were on bail because there was a shopkeeper whose daughter would get kidnapped by a daku, like a criminal, would kidnap her and then like abuse her, and that shopkeeper saw Bhai Fauja Singh walking wearing bana, and then like unanu lanta mariyan, like he like insulted him and said like, oh, you know, Guru Gobind Singh Ji sings, they're nothing. And then Bhai Fauja Singh asked him like why he's upset, and he told him the story that this guy comes, kidnaps my daughter, takes her away, and then Bhai Fauja Singh said, look, I'm going to stay with you, I'm going to show you. And then when that guy came back to take his daughter, Bhai Fauja Singh attacked him, like chopped him up, and then he was arrested and he was in prison for that incident. Just as like, you know, you got an individual who's in like this position of leadership, and is not like ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਗੱਲਾਂ ਬਾਤਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ, it's their ਰਹਿਣੀ ਬਹਿਣੀ, it's their how they're existing in samaj, how ਉਹ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਵਿਚਰ ਰਿਹਾ, like we talked about in the previous episode, they're existing in the form of the Azad Khalsa, and there's no parwah about like courts and like, you know, jail or whatever, or the dunyavi consequences of these things, and they're not thinking with this like manmati, like, you know, nafa nuksan, profit loss, what is the, you know, the benefit loss equation of this. It's like ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਨੂੰ ਵੰਗਾਰਿਆ ਆ, now like they're fulfilling their role, like ਚਾਰੇ ਜੁਗ ਚੱਲੇ ਕਹਾਣੀ ਤੇਗ ਦੀ, they're fulfilling that role of what the pagoti, what the shastar means for the Khalsa. And as they like, as we said, as they're arrested, as they're in prison, ਉੱਥੇ ਵੀ ਫਿਰ ਉਹ ਭਗਤੀ ਦੀ ਰੀਤ ਚਲਾਉਂਦੇ ਆ, and like you see the famous photos, like they're doing prachar in prison, like they ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਉਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦਾ ਭੈ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ, they're not like cowed by it or defeated by it, that same spirit is there. And then ਉਹ ਜਦੋਂ ਨਿਕਲਦੇ ਆ, like ਉਸ ਸਮੇਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ you know, ਜਿਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਉਹ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, like the ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਪਾਉਂਦੇ ਆ, like they come out of the langar hall, like, you know, doing seva, like making prashade, you know, Paji saying their hands are covered in like atta and stuff, and just generally just their whole personality, like how much prem and pyar they had for Sangat, and the foresight and the vision that they had, and 78 becomes this massive like turning point, because before 78, like the emergency that happens, the emergency is basically it's emergency rule that's imposed by the government of India, where the right to life is suspended. And during the emergency, which Indira Gandhi and like the President of India institute, they suspend the right to life, they suspend all democratic liberties or whatever was there. And at the same time, Indira Gandhi's son is instituting a forced sterilization campaign that's targeting the poorer sections of the community. Like that Brahmanwad, that like that caste aspect is there, right? Like these sections of the community, of the country are inferior, they shouldn't have the right to reproduce, etc. And it's a massively controversial period of like, you know, so-called Indian democracy that's, you know, debated even till this point. But like during that period of emergency, even though you're seeing this, you know, is foreshadowing what's going to come, but 78, like the way the Nirankaris are propped up, the way they're, you know, they're directed, their violence is directed towards the Sikhs, it's going to show now the taste of everything that's going to come now for the next like more than 2 decades. And it's that the prelude to the Darbar Sahib, the way just tariqe de naal Sikh learn who they are and learn their relationship with the Indian state. Like that, you know, we were talking about earlier that between the Azad Khalsa, now this new entity of the state emerges that claims sovereignty over their bodies. Now, we don't know what that relationship is like between us and the Sarkar. We need to find out what this new thing is. Now it's all going to come out in, you know, in front of like the whole dunya.
I think what Paji is saying, that's exactly right. Because initially, they were basically trying to give us a narrative that your dushmans are the Pakistanis or the Muslims, because, you know, the after the partition, whatever market we had. So in 65 and 71, there were 2 wars. ਜਿਹੜੀਆਂ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੀਆਂ regiments ਨੇ ਲੜੀਆਂ ਅੱਗੇ ਹੋ ਕੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ, ਹੈ ਨਾ, they were celebrating ਇਹ ਬੜੇ ਬਹਾਦਰ ਨੇ, and all about their valor stories and everything. However, now is the true state of, you know, that we were getting the true taste of how the relationship's going to be, as Paji mentioned. And with that relationship is a sect versus a whole community. And the Indian government, and forget who's on the throne. It was the Janata Party, as I said, it was not Congress. However, this is what we're going to conclude at the end, it's basically the deep state that acts, it's basically the deep state that has alliances. So their alliance was with the Nirankari, and unfortunately, Akali Dal was, hand in glove with them at that time, the way they escorted him out and everything. So that you just realize that after contributing like 85% to the azadi of this very nation, we are a second-class citizen. And that's what Jarnail Singh Khalsa Pindram were emphasizing on. At the same time, in army, Sikhs are getting, court-martialed at the same time. Sikhs are getting, dismissed without pension. All this is happening while this is happening as well.
The Sukha was like particularly brutal as well. And I think the brutal nature of the Sukha and how the Singhs embraced Shaheed was massively impactful. I think that given how close that period was to partition and the violence that happened in partition, close to 1 million people that died during that, I think that would have been quite heavy on the Qawm as well. And I think Sant Ji's leadership at this point is really important.
Just on the brutal part of the Sukha, like, so Brijeet Singh was telling me about this the other day, about how obviously you had like, the police that were firing upon the Singhs, like, Bhai Fauja Singh's like wounds, like quite grievous, or like lashan katte kar rahe sige. But basically because the way the Singhs were all surrounded and like how like vicious the Nirankaris were, like they essentially like butchered them. And there's Paj was telling me about this Bibi that took from the scene, had taken like the case of the Singhs and like their kashere like covered in blood, and had thrown them at like the SGPC office, the daftar, saying like, what are you going to do about this? You guys should do something. So imagine like the scene, just till like you could get those types of nishaniya of the Singhs from that scene. Like imagine how like vicious the attack was, and it involves the police, like one of the senior police officers shooting at the Singhs. So that like the level of like viciousness of the violence that the Sikhs were met with, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ like ਇੱਕ ਵਾਰੀ ਅੱਖਾਂ ਖੋਲਤੀਆਂ, like that ਜਿਹੜੀ like ਬੀਰ ਰਸ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆ, like that the desire for the Sikhs, the Naujawan at that time now, was very clearly that there's going to be a clash, a clash now that's coming, and ਇਹਨਾਂ ਚੀਜ਼ਾਂ ਦਾ ਬਦਲਾ ਲਿਆ ਜਾਣਾ. Like no matter how we can try to, today I think a lot of the conversation becomes focused on like this political correctness, but at that time the Singhs were very clear that like this incident that's happened now, it has to be avenged. And like the funeral as well of like those the Singhs, the Sikhs that were there were picking up like their ashes and like carrying them, and like like we're gonna avenge your like Shaheed. But yeah, like the whole, Vijay can go into a lot more detail and about.
And some of the Gursikhs that were at the funeral, like there were people who had like lots of pyar and prem for Bhai Fauja Singh Ji, a lot of his companions who had spent time at Khalsa Farm. In his memory as well, in the memory of Bhai Fauja Singh, they held other Gurmat camps at Khalsa Farm. And at these kind of camps, the people like Jatha Sukhdev Singh Ji, Bhai Anok Singh Ji Babbar, Bhai Salakhan Singh Ji, like the Nago ke Jatha, like there's so many Gursikhs that came from that, and a small group of people that then, like Baisa was saying, led like the movement afterwards. And one of those people who left his Nirankari at the time, Jatha Sukhdev Singh Ji, came directly to Amritsar, and they stood at railway stations to try and to say, get down bar nikalna, how is this good bachana, how's he going to leave Punjab? But it was actually Badal who actually escorted him out. And it was Bhai Sukhdev Singh Ji who picked up like the Rak and stuff and said that like, we're not gonna rest until justice is done. And Sant Ji, at the Bog of this Rehansabai, there's a speech that's been uploaded on YouTube. I'm sure you guys maybe put that in the link. There's a speech that Sant Ji delivers at the Bog of the Rehansabai. So during this Rehansabai, they're announcing the Shaheeds. I think it's by Dharamveer Singh, the Mataji Os Rehansabai sige. And there's a Gursikh who later became a part of the Babbar Khalsa, who says that he was sitting next to her when they announced his name, and he goes, Mataji didn't move, like she didn't just stayed in like abhyas and stuff, and didn't have any effect on her. And Sant Ji comes, and that speech is like everyone needs to listen to that speech, because this the 1978 is like the foundations of the armed struggle, right, for Khalistan, like the impact it had. And Sant Ji's speech at this time, he speaks about the Sukha. in a very important way, and the leadership that he gives is really important because it's such a bhyanak like Saka. It could be taken, you know, in a different way. It could be taken as like a bad thing or a good thing, whatever. And Sant Ji's leadership makes sure that we give it the perspective and we take the route that we need to as Khalsa, right? And Sant Ji says in this speech, he says that because at this time they didn't know how many Singhs had become Shaheed, they said je do jathyan cho 5-7 Singh Shaheed ho gaye, koi vaddi gal nahi. And he's saying that like in the times of the Guru, like, you know, for the to keep the upman of Guru Sahib, he goes lakha Singh ne Guru Sahib de samne shahidiyan paiyan, has ke paiyan. So, and that he said that this was a window that had opened, and it was Maharaj's kirpa, like how long this window was going to stay for. But jada daur ya shahidiyan da, he goes, this is just opened. Because there was a little bit of controversy as well, because Sant Jarnail Singh Ji didn't go to the march himself, because as they were sending jathe of like when the Singhs that were there, 150 Singhs here, and like they were like making jathedars, so like Bhai Fauja Singh was one with like 100 Singhs or 50 Singhs, and they were sending them, and then there's a bit of a dispute about whether this is members of Bachhatbandis or whichever, but Sant Ji Singh ne ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਹੁਕਮ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀ that you need to stay behind, because if there's going to be a fallout from this, then someone needs to handle this, isn't it? All the obviously Shane Singhs, all the important, you know, like Guru Sikhs have gone, and you know, if you need to stay behind. So Sant Ji ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਬਹੁਤ ਭਾਰਾ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਸੀਗਾ, and he said like from 78, he goes that he says in this speech on the 14th of April 1978, he says that, you know, that he considers himself dead. Like, you know, ਜਿੰਨਾ ਚਿਰ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਉਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਦਾ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਹੁਣ ਬਦਲਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਲਿਆ ਜਾਂਦਾ, that he, you know, he doesn't consider himself alive. And he said about the Panth as well, that we should all consider ourselves dead. Je Khalsa said, when the day of the Khalsa was, you know, Asthapya Siya Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj in Amritsar, if the Nirankaris can do this, we should consider ourselves dead in it. And then from 1978, then obviously this layer shuru Sant ne ਕੀਤੀ ਸੀ with all the ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੌਜਵਾਨ ਗੁਰਸਿੱਖ ਸੀਗੇ from the Jatha, Nahang Dals, all the ਜਿਹੜੇ like, you know, especially the ones who were connected to Bhai Fauja Singh, and their main objective was to bring justice for the Shaheeds and to close down the Nirankaris. And in furtherance of that objective, Sant Ji, you know, worked with other Panthic personalities and Jathedars and stuff, and eventually had a Hukamamma issued from the Akaal Takhat, which said that obviously
Roti beti di sanj nahi rakhni. Basically, they excommunicated Nirankaris from the Khalsa Panth, that we should not have any sanj with them anymore.
Dharam chalavan santo baran, dost saban ko mool paran.
So and it was with that Hukamamma that then they had the authority, like the Panth had like a decision, because it wasn't based on like a court decision, it wasn't based on any government, it was based on our institution, right? Like we were talking about before. And I think one of the, like Sant Ji during this time leads many like protests, rallies. He openly writes against the Akali Dal, the central government. He makes enemies of from all of those quarters. It was at this time that right-wing Hindu fascist organizations like the Jan Sangh, the BJP, the RSS, they come out openly in support of the Nirankari. So when Sant Ji says that we're going to launch a morcha to close all the Nirankari bhavans, and they did that. He launched. He was one of the Panth Singhs who marched for that, and they had to close all of them across Punjab. Then it was Harbans Lal Khanna, the BJP leader, who said that in the absence of any other support, we will make sure they reopen. So it was very clear to the Panth now that, like, you know, where everyone was standing. So everyone was like, obviously, they all came out. And Sant Ji's taking like this really, really, and there's one particular speech that he delivers during this time that sets him apart from other leaders. Because some people write as well, like some of his critics, Sant Ji's critics, like the pro-government writers, write that as a response to 78, he became this huge leader. Like, you know, his massive like rise to prominence was because of like 78. But it wasn't the event in itself, it was his leadership from it. Sant Ji wasn't in a position of political leadership as like Badal, who was the chief minister at the time, as Dora, who was like the Pradhan of the SGPC. So other people were already in political positions of power, but it was how Sant Ji led the Khalsa at this point, obviously with the Gursikhs, the Naujawan who were mobilizing around him, that gave him that prominence. And one of those was a speech at Manji Sahib. There was a Panthika cut that was just the Jathedar, so like ਜਿਹੜੇ ਜ਼ਿਲ੍ਹੇ ਦੇ ਜਥੇਦਾਰ ਸੀਗੇ, the Panch Takhat, Akali Dal, And so it was like a massive meeting of the Sirlat Jere leaders of the time. And at this meeting, they were discussing how they were going to bring Guru Bachana, who had been taken out of Punjab, how we're going to bring him back to Punjab, how we're going to get a case registered against him, and etc. etc. And during all of these speeches, this one Nihang Singh forcefully grabs the mic and he says, "Pe jehdi tusi gallan karde ha, tusi court case di gallan karde ha, ek khalsa parampara de ulte hai. These are against the conduct and the rayat of the Khalsa." He said that he said what used to happen before is jira jathadar honda siga, he would stand up and say, "Aad dosht ne jidda kaam kite, these are the sins of this dosht, of this enemy of the Panth. Singo jaake oda sir lao." And he goes, "Minnu apne jidda guru te vishwaas hai that if you guys do that, I will go and I'll go take his head." And the whole place went quiet. And it's interesting, the person who told us, the person who told us about this was actually present. And this individual who never met Sant Ji before, didn't know of the Taksal even, he speaks about it, and he later becomes part of the Jajaru Jethebandis in fights in the Battle of Amritsar. And he says after the Nihang Singh says this, he goes, this one speaker, it was actually Bibi Rajinder Kaur, who has a bad habit of speaking at the wrong time, unfortunately, because then she says, like, we need to keep our wits about us, or however you want to translate that. And so then everything calmed down again. And he goes, and the next was Sant Ji. And he goes, I never saw him before. He goes, Thodi Dari, he just become Jathadar like a few months before this, right? And he goes, Sant Ji ne mic, then Sant Ji came on the mic, and Sant Ji said, "ਇਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਬੀਬੀ ਜੀ ਨੇ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਜੋਸ਼ ਤੋਂ ਹੋਸ਼ ਹੈ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਜੰਗਾਂ ਲੜੇ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਬਿਨਾਂ ਹੋਸ਼ ਤੋਂ ਲੜੇ ਸੀਗੇ, ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋਏ ਆ ਉਹ ਬਿਨਾਂ ਹੋਸ਼ ਤੋਂ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀਆਂ." And what he said was that the Panth has made, and this shows for me that the political astuteness of Sant Ji as well, because he didn't, and also his kind of his Panthic and his Panthic approach to things, because he could have gone on the stage and said this court case thing is ridiculous, nothing's going to happen, you lot are all this and the other. But what he said was that Panth has made a decision to fight a court case to bring justice for the Shaheeds, right? And he goes, I'm no leader of the Panth, I'm no Jathadar, I'm a Charu Bradariya, I'm a servant of the Khalsa, right? He goes, but if you guys fail to restore justice, he goes, if you guys fail to deliver justice, then he goes, then I will stand and and he goes, and the Jakarta just rang out. And the interesting thing about this in terms of political astuteness of Sant Ji was that he then had basically tied up the political elites, because Badal's there thinking, we're not going to get justice through the courts, we're not going to be able to do this. But at the same time, they couldn't challenge what he was saying, because no Sikh is going to argue against that if we don't get justice, then we'll take justice. So that was the speech that was delivered. And essentially a court case was registered, the case was taken out of Punjab and went to Kartar. And there were 64 there were 64 Nirankaris, including the Guru Bachana who stood trial, and ultimately they were acquitted. Lala Jagannath spoke against the Singhs, so did Akali minister Umran spoke against the Singhs, and they were acquitted. And Guru Bachana, the Nirankari fake guru, said upon his release that your guru ne 55 jidda 52 Raja nu release kita si, I've released 64. So everything he did was just trying to do that. And this was in January 1980, and they could go to Sikh Taksal, they all can this, but when this decision was released, that's when Sant Ji said, their justice has failed, when we'll show our justice. And then it was actually a group of Singhs, including Bhai Ranjit Singh Ji, who later became the Kartar Jathadar, by Kabul Singh Ji, by Lakha Singh Nagoke, by Major Singh Nagoke, by Dilveer Singh Abhyasi. It was a big group of Singhs. At that time, all Nojawan were Katte Sige, and they went into his heavily armored compound and posing as carpenters. I think Bhai Ranjit Singh Ji and Bhai Kabul Singh went in there when he was returning one night.
The funeral of the Tera Singhs, that was attended by thousands and thousands of sangat. There's photos of it. You see they're one of the chikha rakhiya jandiya, where they burn their bodies, the funeral pyres, and just all the way around, thousands and thousands of sangat. And even where the spot where the Singhs became Shaheed, utte unhone Bhai Amrik Singh unhone ta hor Singhan ne ral ke they erected a Nishan Sahib on that spot. or we like takke de naal, like through conflict. It wasn't like some kind of process or whatever. To honor that space. So there's this huge feeling now amongst the Panthak Naujawan that what's happened is wrong. That the Panth at this moment, at this turn, at this crossroads that we're in, needs this type of decisive leadership. And like I've heard that story so many times from Paji, like about like the Nihang Singh who stands up in that Akat and says, this is how the Khalsa delivers justice, and like Minu Hukam Karo, and like Sant Ji's response, and it just shows that Sant Ji, he understood that Panthic feeling, and he was fully like samarpan to Guru. There was no like any other dunyavi like pressure or whatever, and that's why he could outmaneuver everyone. And it was because, on paper, on a dunyavi sense, Sant Jarnail Singh is like, how he's described by the Virodhis, like a village preacher, uneducated, fanatic or whatever. They use like really derogatory language towards somebody. But this individual who's a young man, like in his early 30s when he becomes Jathedar of the Taksal, is able to outmaneuver like people that have been in Piri Dar Piri like politics, like the Akali Dal, like for generations, the Indian states, like, entire like bureaucracy, their administrative power, like this Nirankari cult, like who's, you got to understand, like the hankar of Gurbachana, I think, is what offended Sikhs the most. Like, obviously like the Beadbi, but Beadbi karke enne hankare hona, like giving those types of statements, like, demeaning Guru Sahib in that way, saying like, I've released more prisoners, I'm going to make more, sat satare, etc. And utte hamesha khalse di reet rahi hai ki jithe ਇਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਹੰਕਾਰੀ ਹੋਈ ਤਾਕਤ ਪੈਦਾ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ ਕਿ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਹੰਕਾਰ ਭੰਨਣਾ, ਲਾਈਕ ਦੁਸ਼ਮਣ ਦਾ ਸਿਰ ਫੇਂਕ ਕੇ ਨਿਸ਼ਾਨ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਕੱਢਣਾ, ਲਾਈਕ ਉਹ ਲਲਕਾਰਨਾ ਆ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ, ਲਾਈਕ ਟੂ ਚੈਲੰਜ ਐਂਡ ਡਿਸਟਰੋਏ ਐਨੀ form of egoist power is always been a part of how Sikhs have dealt with these types of situations. So I think Sant Jarnail Singh channeled that energy because he was fully samarpan to Guru. There was no other, and all of that feeling that was there, like all of those Naujawan ਜਿਹੜੇ ਸੰਗਤ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ ਉੱਠ ਰਹੇ ਸੀਗੇ, like ਇੰਨੇ like ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਦਾ ਖੂਨ ਡੁੱਲਿਆ, like the energy that created, like it was a big thing. It wasn't like, ਤੇਰਾ ਸਿੰਘ ਇਸ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋਣੇ, and this was for the Panth as well. It wasn't for like, like some soldiers in our army or whatever, and it was just for the pyar that they had for Guru Sahib. It completely like changed the ground. And then the Gurbachana's assassination, and this is another thing as well, like Sant Jarnail Singh, I think a lot of people present him today, or they understand Sant Jarnail Singh by watching his speeches, but that's one aspect of Sant Jarnail Singh's leadership. Sant Jarnail Singh was organizing and mobilizing Naujawan behind the scenes in a completely different way. So from 1978, when the Vaisakhi massacre happens, to April 1980, when Gurbachana is assassinated, that whole thing is planned. And even at the police at the time, saying they're like they're saying we haven't seen a sophisticated assassination like this, right? And the way they did it, they got jobs in his house, etc. And but to see that by Ranjit Singh Unago kis pind gaye sige, and like the connections that they had.
The other thing was important to note as well, like the leader of the paramilitary group, his name is I'm forgetting his name right now, the Nanki Siga, but the police report, the Punjab police report from the Sukha was that he led them by horseback and stuff, and he was assassinated in the same day as Gurbachana was in Delhi. Pratap.
Yeah, when he says that I've the coordinated nature of this, these killings of, we haven't seen this type of.
And this is about like, in terms of like, when the Gursikhs were speaking earlier, like I'm not well versed with like Gur Itihas as you guys all are, but all I kept thinking about was the parallels to this, because Sant Ji delivers a speech. Even it was in the court case that a few weeks before the assassination happened, Sant Ji says from stage, I think it was a Guru Karne Delhi, where he says, but like within a few weeks now, like Oda Sir Jada Singhane Varna, we're going to take his head and things. And he was given a speech that after obviously the Sukha happens, after Gurbachana is assassinated, Sant Ji was given a speech, and he was saying that when we were talking about this, and he likened Bhai Kabul Singh and Bhai Ranjit Singh Ji to Sukha Mehtab Singh. And he goes, when I was speaking about this before, he goes, the youth had come to me and said to me that forget Sukha Mehtab Singh, He goes, ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮਾਤਾ ਆ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਭਾਈ ਸੁੱਖਾ ਤੇ ਭਾਈ ਮਹਿਤਾਬ ਸਿੰਘ ਨੂੰ ਜਨਮ ਦੇਣਾ ਸੀ ਉਹ ਵੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਅੱਜ ਉਹਦਾ ਵੀ ਅੱਜ ਜੰਮ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਇਆ. That she's not even around. That Bibi doesn't exist who's going to give those kind of... And that's what they were giving Sant Ji, like Lamme and stuff. That like, you're talking about Sukha Mehtab Singh. Who's going to do this in it? Like, even that Bibi's not born. And he goes, within 2.5 years, Jinnah court case, he goes, oh, near time, Bibi bhi jam pisi. Or she grew up, she got married, and she was with Sukha Mehtab Singh ne jaake ਉਹਦੇ ਛਾਤੀ 'ਚ ਗੋਲੀਆਂ ਮਾਰ ਕੇ ਆ ਗਏ ਸੀ. So like, you know, it's shown that like within that's for me like the Kirpa of Guru Sahib, that in a very small time, like we can turn from like that to that.
You're talking about the other day on the way down here, you're talking about how the Singhs that were named in the FIR, and it came out afterwards that there was like a long list of Singhs that were named, and they could have got arrested, and they were walking around like openly, because also at that time the police didn't have one of the himmat nahi pendi si to go arrest those Singhs. The only one that got arrested was Ranjit Singh, because he listened to the Akali Dal and they said we'll get you off. And then he ended up doing like some serious amount of time because of it. But the rest of them, ਉਹ ਸੰਤਾਂ ਦਾ ਇੰਨਾ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਪ੍ਰਭਾਵ ਸੀਗਾ, like ਉਹ ਸੰਤਾਂ ਦੇ ਹੁੰਦਿਆਂ ਹੋਇਆ, like they couldn't grab any, like Bhai Lal Singh, Kabul Singh, Nagoke Singhs were sharyam walking around.
I think that's what Singhs, and I think a lot of credit goes to Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, that he was able to channelize that rose and energy into a direction. And obviously, you know, as Bhai Sahib mentioned, 63 of the 64 people were acquitted, including Gurbachana. And later, within 3 years, 22 of them are dead. And that created a big, massive uprising within the community that Indian state has failed to give us any sort of justice. ਉਸ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਫਿਰ ਮੁੜ ਕੇ ਚੈਨਲਾਈਜ਼ ਕਰਨਾ, ਧਰਮ ਯੁੱਧ ਮੋਰਚੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਸ ਨੂੰ ਅੱਗੇ ਵਧਾਉਣਾ, ਤੇ 84 ਤੱਕ, ਤੇ ਫਿਰ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਮੂਵਮੈਂਟ ਸੀ, ਮਤਲਬ ਹਾਲਾਤ ਉਦੋਂ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਸਨ ਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਪੰਜਾਬ ਦੀ ਨੁਹਾਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਬਦਲਣੀ ਹੈ. ਜਦੋਂ ਨਿਰੰਕਾਰੀ ਆਫਿਸ ਸ਼ਟ ਹੋਇਆ, ਜਦੋਂ ਨਿਰੰਕਾਰੀ ਸੋਧੇ ਗਏ ਵਾਰੀ-ਵਾਰੀ, ਹੈ ਨਾ, ਐਂਡ ਇਟ ਵਾਜ਼ ਲਾਈਕ ਕਿ ਹੁਣ ਅਸੀਂ ਪੰਥ ਨੂੰ ਵਾਪਸ ਲੀਹਾਂ 'ਤੇ ਲਿਆਉਣਾ. ਪ੍ਰਚਾਰ ਦੀਆਂ ਮੂਵਮੈਂਟਸ ਹੋ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਸੀ, ਵੱਡੀਆਂ ਗੈਦਰਿੰਗਸ ਹੋ ਰਹੀਆਂ ਸੀ. ਐਂਡ ਆਈ ਰਿਮੈਂਬਰ ਦੈਟ ਜਦੋਂ ਸੰਤ ਜੀ ਆਈ ਥਿੰਕ ਬੰਬੇ ਤੋਂ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਨੇ, ਮੁੰਬਈ ਤੋਂ, there was a big sort of a jaloos in Delhi. And obviously these, you know, fanatics which were against the Sikhs, they were very much agitated, like, what's happening, you know. It feels like Sant Ji and the other Singhs, they're becoming like a parallel government in Punjab, if you'd like 100%. To, you know. So they were becoming like, people were, instead of going to the police station, they were actually coming to Sant Ji ki mere naal eh hoya, can you get me justice?
And just about like, you know, the impact the impact that had, and how like, you know, Sant Ji was channeling the impact of the Shaheeds of 78 had global ramifications. So we have like Gursikh in like the UK, you know, mobilizing for this as well, and like you have Bhai Fauja Singh Ji, Babbar, who was in Canada and, you know, completely disconnected from those groups of Singhs, didn't know any one of them, leaves Kartar chad ke, oh, Madan chad ke. They came in from 79. One of the massive responses as well was because the Nirankari and Najda and their Tariyan, like all these cults had such a massive, had an impact because of the government, that the first thing they did was they did this layer, this Gurmat Prachar layer, and Bhai Fauja Singh Ji, Bhai Kulwant Singh Ji Nagoke, Bhai Vadava Singh Ji, Bhai Teresem Singh Kala Sangha, all these Gursikhs that were like, you know, mobilizing. They were from different groups, from different backgrounds and stuff, and they all were united with that dard, that Qawmi dard, and also for the Shaheed. So and these group of Singhs, and I think it was in different areas, right, like Patti and like Taran and different sides. And on the other side, you have a group that was emerging of like Bhai Sukhdev Singh Ji, Bhai Anog Singh Ji, Bhai Sulakhan Singh Ji, Bhai Menga Singh Ji, and those groups then ended up formulating into the Babbar Khalsa in the early 80s. And their first nishana, their main nishana, was the Nirankaris, and they used that court charge sheet that were released as like a shopping list essentially, and vari like one by one the Sat Satare and obviously all the major Nirankaris like leaders were then assassinated. But in terms of the impact it had on the Sangharsh on like 1984 is that, so you have the Babbar Khalsa that emerged from 1978. And then if we look at the Sikh Student Federation, at the time, the All India Sikh Student Federation, Bhai Amrik Singh Ji was like really, really impacted by the Saka, you know. And if you look at some of the pictures, you can see that and how like there were, and even in terms of you said the Nishan Sahib, eventually a Gurukar was built on the ground, and that was government ground.
Yeah.
And Bhai Amrik Singh Ji was one of the ones who basically led a morcha where they would start building a Kanth, and at night the police would like tear it down the next day, and they had this like tense standoff with the police. And I remember one of the Guru Sikhs in the Taksal saying that Sant Ji said to Bhai Amrik Singh at the time that, listen, Ajay Sama, like it's not ready yet, like, you know, calm down kind of thing. And Bhai Amrik Singh, because all of that and stuff, and Bhai Amrik Singh said to Sant Ji, because we're taking this land in it. So now that land is
It's a Gurdwara
yeah, it's a Gurdwara Sahib, right?
It's a Gurdwara Sahib run by the Ahmedabad Taksal. Next door is a school run by the Akhand Kirtan Jatha.
That's it. And then even like these are all the kind of things that why these individuals, like we mentioned, Bhai Kulwant Singh Nagoke, Bhai Sukhdev Singh Ji, Bhai Anok Singh, the reason why all of these Guru Sikhs had like such a huge following afterwards is because following the Sakha, the way they responded to it. So for example, Bhai Amrik Singh Ji, and there's an author called Dalbir Singh who was actually a Naxalite, and he obviously got really impacted because he was the first on the scene following the Nirankari Sakha, and he saw Sant Ji and Bhai Amrik Singh going to the hospitals, or when the post-mortems were happening, how they were like bringing the bodies with such kind of like, you know, prem and stuff, and like, you know, Ajkal obviously who in that kind of position would be doing that Hathi Seva, right? Obviously the city was so kind of brutalized that they were saying from the post-mortem, Dalbir Singh, the journalist, talks about how like just from the room of the post-mortem was just blood just like pouring out. It was such a bhyanak scene. But Sant Ji and Bhai Amrik Singh Ji and obviously the other Jathedar Singh Ji, they were like, you know, such, you know, like sincerity and how they responded to it. And in regards to this federation, at this time, the Sikh Student Federation, the All India Sikh Student Federation, was defunct. They had no leadership. It was a very small group. Leftist politics was like all the rage in universities in Punjab. And the Sikh Student Federation was essentially a product of the Akali Dal, and it was like their student wing. And a lot of the Akali Dal leaders would come out of the federation, and the federation would mobilize and like around the Akali Dal. And interestingly, after the Sakha, a few months after the Sakha, a huge convention is called where the original members and all the former pradhans of the federation call this massive convention to say that, like, you know, the times that are coming against the Panth, obviously with this, obviously they understood that this is like, you know, this is huge, and the ramifications for this and what this means. I mean, this is a kulla vanguard from the state, because Indira Gandhi went and saw a Gurbachana after the Sakha and reassured him. So did the Moranji, like the president.
Moranji Desai was the Prime Minister.
And they had full support of the government. So the Khalsa knew that we're fully against this now. You know, obviously we talked about the land and everything we've been losing, and now we've got this government who's trying to like essentially wipe us out, like from the root. So they have this massive convention, and at this convention, loads of Sikh leaders, like student leaders, come with the Jathes, and they nominate themselves to become Pradhan of the Student Federation. And the amazing thing is when they put their nominations forward and the original panel of the original founders of the Federation look at the names, what they decide, and this is why obviously more work needs to be done to understand, but when they look at the list of names, Bhai Amrik Singh is not nominated. He hasn't nominated himself. And they look at the other nominees and they say the only person that can lead the Federation into what the times are coming is Bhai Amrik Singh. And the crazy thing is that one of the character, you know, like Only anybody and things that even the people who nominated themselves, they withdrew their nominations and accepted it. And Bhai Amrik Singh then becomes the president of the federation. The federation like has a massive change. I mean, from being a small organization towards 84, had like hundreds of thousands of members all across Punjab and India as well. And he remains the Pradhan every year on year, becomes re-elected every year until 84. And the federation, if you look at those first few years, they organize around the Sakha. You know, all of their, like when they issue their first magazine, Shamshir Dast, they march to the site. Everything is always around that. On the 13th April, it was a massive mobilizing thing. The National Council of Khalistan was an organization that was advocating for an independent state from like 79. They are established following the Sakha. Dal Khalsa, a few months after the Sukha again. So all of these organizations, political organizations, youth organizations, some of them paramilitary, like Hathiarbands, Naujawan Jathbandiyan, they all kind of operate following the Sukha, completely motivated by what happened.
So now you're in a position where there's Sikhs in politics, various Sikh views are in politics, not just one monolith of Shromani Akali Dal opposed to Sukha. There's of course the Singhs of the Babur Khalsa that have organised into kind of a movement. There's Singhs like by Surinder Singh Sodhi, by Lab Singh, etc. That group that's organised, that's going to later, which will come and do things. So now we've got multiple people in play after the Sukha. So that's how impactful the Sukha really is. I think the outrage in Aam Sangat and the assurance in Aam Sangat that actually it's us and them. Us and I've read an interesting like a bit about before the Sodha, of course, of Gurbatina. I think there's a Singh. He's a truck driver. And he opens fire on the...
there was a previous assassination attempt, even like February, March 1980.
He's said to be a truck driver, and he didn't really know, he wasn't like too much into Sikh and saying, but ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੰਨਾ ਪ੍ਰਭਾਵ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਵੀ ਇਹ group ਵਿੱਚ ਨਹੀਂ ਏਦਾਂ ਕੀਤਾ, and he heard the convoy is going to go past him. So he parked his truck in the middle of the road, and he, at this point, Gurbachana he was quite aware of his security measures, so he'd travel in decoy cars, essentially, and the Singh opened fire, and I think it wasn't obviously him, but someone was shot in that. Armed person, not connected to Taksal, just nothing. ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਇੰਨਾ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਵੀ, you know what, I heard Gurbachana ਮੇਰੇ ਮਗਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਲੰਘ ਸਕਦਾ.
And then the same
truck and have a go at him.
The same Rath, like there's a top Vakil in Amritsar has said that the same night, like Sant Ji comes to his house like with like 50 Singhs and says like, Kalno, go and you're going to do Peshi for the Singhs.
So Sant Ji arranges that. This is the amazing nature of Sant Jarnail Singh. There's Dharmak Shakshiyat Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, hana jehde mainu lagda takriban some of us in like Dharmak circles are very drawn to. And then there's Sant Ji is the complete leadership, the complete leadership. There's a siyasi nature, outmaneuvering, like Baji said, outmaneuvering the Akalis. And then there's the completion of Sant Jarnail Singh, the ability to do that and do the things underground and find out actually this is some random guy that's just opened fire.
I've heard them described as like, like Ummama. Like they protected the Singhs and stuff. But when I know in Najda, like they had, and the beautiful thing about Sant Ji as well is that like he doesn't see like Jathebandi and stuff, essentially. Like you don't ever see through his speeches where he's like particularly promoting his Jathebandi that he's a leader of. He openly says that when they alleged there were allegations against obviously the Congress thing and all the rest of it, he goes I have sold out to the hijackers, I've sold out to the motorcycle wale and stuff, all these Sikh like seva karde shidiyan paunde, I've sold out to them, like they've and that was a beautiful summer as well, because like following in the 14th of April, that speech, Sant Ji talks about the two Jathebandis, and he said like some people have asked about who are these two Jathebandis and what's the difference between them, and he goes ਸਾਡੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੋਈ ਫਰਕ ਨਹੀਂ ਗਾ, ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਤੇ ਉਹ ਸਾਡੇ ਆ. He goes, ਅਸੀਂ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਤੁਰੇ ਆ ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਕੱਠੇ ਤੁਰਨਾ ਹੈ, ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ like will lead us.
You spoke about this offline earlier as well, so you're saying that in those days that like today there's definitely fractions, and we talk about this a lot now. We see that this whole like fake ekta kind of thing, right? But like, what was it like then? Was everyone together then?
The thing is, like from my limited understanding of it, is that because of the nature of these individuals, like these people are like brimming with like like abhyas, and like they have so much pyar inside them that they'll like like Shamsher Singh was talking about, like Bhai Fauja Singh did like kirpa on like some random shopkeeper in it. So they had that kind of approach to the armed people. How do you think they would have approached like Nemi Abhyasi Gursikhs in it? So between the groups, Auto Sadech Kartar, like we have issues because we don't have that kind of a jivan. But between them, like if we talk about Bhai Fauja Singh Ji, Nagoke, he was one of the first Shaheeds following Sukha, where the police, we'll talk about this in a bit, but his jivan was such that everyone like claims him as their Singh. The Hungs do, the Jatha does, the Taksal do, because and a lot of these groups, including Bhai Fauja Singh Ji, had sangat of like whether Sant Kartar Singh Ji, the Hung Singh Jathebandiyan as well, and obviously the Jatha. So like they were drawn to like Gursikhs, and they
I
didn't.
think
really
that's
see
the,
it.
I think that's the answer.
Basically, yeah.
That's basically the answer. Well, a twofold answer. One, genuine pyar, not kind of this fakeness. The dusri gal, there's these characters that everybody claims. So, Bhai Surinder Singh Sodhi is another one, and a strong AKJ Khan Kirtan Jatha background. Yeah. Then spends some time in Nihangdal. Then comes to Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, Bhai Fauja Singh Ji, another one. Bhai Kulwan Singh Nago ke, another one. Takriban the Nago ke jatha. So we have these characters which everybody wants to claim. So there is no us there, yours,
And you spoke a lot about like Sant Ji's speech afterwards. What about Bhai Fauja Singh Ji's part, their wife? Did they give a speech as well that they had? Or is there nothing to do with
I'm
that?
not sure about that. I don't think they gave the speech on the 14th, no.
I think she gave a speech afterwards, and she was quite vocal about what happened in terms of letters, and there was a slight rift as well between.
And such is the nimirta. Listen, such is the nimirta of Sant Jarnail Singh Ji. Such is the nimirta. I want to get into this actually a little bit. Santan de khilaf ishtihar vi vande si. After that time particularly, it's the classic we word in Sant Ji go. And some people can fathom the dukh ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਇਹਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਵੀ ਬੀਬੀ ਜੀ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦਾ ਪਚੰਗੀ ਸੀ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਦਾ ਨਾਮ ਲੈਤਾ ਸੀ and she didn't even flinch ਹੈ ਕਿ ਵੀ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਹੋ ਗਏ. Some of them are that avasta, some of them are a bit more ਦੁਨਿਆਵੀ ਸ਼ਾਇਦ ਮੇਰੇ ਤੇਰੇ ਵਰਗੇ and for them it was a kind of a my family member ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮਰਵਾਤਾ etc. They got into that a little bit. ਫਿਰ ਵੀ absolutely no fark Sant Jarnail Singh Ji did with their parvar, una vaste ho shaheed parvar si ta satkarjog si, to the extent we get to the level where opportunists, which are still around now, which are still kind of playing games with us today, same people, see this rift and see how they can maybe exploit. So they again hedge bets. I know we talked about in the earlier podcast. They just hedge bets. Hold on. There's a bit of it within the Panth Sangarshi circle. There's a slight undertone of anti-Sant Jarnail Singh. Yeah, there's the Dal Khalsa who have just gone full Sant. That was their another program. See, remember the Sant Jarnail Singh ke Dharam Yudh Morche da program de saab naal si chalna hai. Sant Jarnail Singh's words. So at that time, the Dal Khalsa had said we Khalistan, nothing else. Yeah. Before even, and Sant Ji still had the position for various reasons, and we can get into that as well. We can get into why, Sant Ji had that position कि भी ऐसी खालिस्तान नहीं मांगते है ना. जब इन्होंने बराबरता दा हक दे नाल रखना सानू, then we'll stay. Otherwise, we'll make arrangements. And essentially, that's where Sant Jarnail Singh putting the stake in the ground. So seeing this within the Sangha, so post 78, like Baji just said, many factions have mobilized, hatiyarband, politically. Kind of socially active, like the recruitment in the All India Sikh Student Federation by Indira Singh Ji. Seeing this, opportunists have seen it. Hold on, how can we, if there's a slight undertone of mera tera, of my family, mere naal dhokha kita gaya, etc., how can we prop those things up? How can we play off those feelings to create disharmony in the movement? And things, again, we're not going to get too much into those things, but those things happened, and they were
it was like the Akali Dal who tried to create a rift between groups because and that's where the allegation of Sant Ji being like a Congress agent, all these things which are laughable come out from the Akali Dal. But essentially from the start, Sant Ji's anti-Akali Dal, anti-Congress, the central government, anti-anything that's anti-obviously Sikh. And essentially,
just explain what were their like their claims? How are they saying that they're Congress, and what are the kind of responses?
I think we'll go into this more as the Morcha unveils. But essentially, the reason why they call him kind of a Congress agent is because it's our fault as well. When we speak about Sant Ji, we kind of fast forward to 84. She's done some speeches, and there's no real explanation as why he was able to kind of operate the way he did. And obviously, when we go through some of the Karname and some of the political power that Sant Ji had, like Lala Jagadhan creates Jagbani in Punjabi in 78 in support of the Nirankaris and to talk against Sant Ji. And he says in 78 that Bindra is the most powerful man in Punjab. Whatever he says goes, and in criticism, dissing the Akali Dal. So that's why all these things was obviously burning them. And in regards to some of the controversy, one thing I find like so inspiring and amazing of Sant Ji as a leader is that he addressed things clearly, openly. So on the 14th of April,
no filter.
On the 14th of April, no filter. On the 14th of April, he says that like he goes that he goes ਕਈਆਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਬੈਠੇ ਹੁਣ ਸੰਗਤ ਵੀ ਸੋਚਣਾ ਹੋਣਾ ਤੇ ਦੂਜਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਪੁੱਤ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਕਰਾ ਕੇ ਆਪ ਬੈਠਾ ਪ੍ਰਚਾਰ ਕਰਦਾ and he goes ਖਾਲਸਾ ਜੀ he goes ਸੰਗਤ ਜੀ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਨਹੀਂ ਆ he goes ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦਿਖਾਉਣਗੇ and what was he goes ਸਿੰਘਾਂ ਦਾ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਹੁਕਮ ਸੀਗਾ I was forced to stay but the what's prophetic in what he says is that he goes ਮੈਂ ਇਹ ਗੱਲ ਜ਼ਿਆਦਾ ਨਾ ਜਾਵਾਂ ਪਰ ਮੇਰਾ ਵੀ ਸਮਾਂ ਆਉਣਾ he goes ਕਲਗੀਧਰ ਦੱਸਣਗੇ he goes but ਇੰਨੇ ਸ਼ਬਦਾਂ ਚ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪਤਾ ਹੀ ਹੋ ਗਿਆ so essentially what you were saying was that I can't go into this too much now because it's 1978 he goes but my time will be revealed and like I'm obviously ਮੇਰੀ ਵੀ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਸ਼ਹੀਦੀ ਹੋਣੀ ਹੈ and he goes like you know that the Guru Sahib's going to show this but he addressed it like the next day and I think what's a big disservice as well is that following 78 Sant Ji you know from morcha, you know, put himself there. And sometimes, you know, he's criticized because, you know, like all these actions are happening and Sant Ji is the leader, right? He's the political leader. And it's like almost as if he was getting all the clout, all the credit for it. But essentially, he was the one putting his neck on the line, isn't it? You know, when he's arrested and questioned by the CBI following the Gurbachna's assassination, they said to him that you said in a speech that, you know, you would weigh the killers in gold and stuff.
Yeah.
And he goes, I would. He goes, if you can bring them to me, I would. He goes, that's how we feel about them.
Yeah. They'd ask, have you got the gold? And he said, have you got Ranjit Singh?
Yeah, bring
Ranjit Singh. I'll bring
and some people, sadly, like that also became a bit of a controversial thing. Like, where's the gold? But like, essentially, Sant Ji was, you know, but he was the only.
Sant Ji was mocking them.
So he was showing that. So it was at that time to openly say, you know, like to claim that. You know, that took, what people don't understand is that, like, you know, each time where there was the morcha for the closing the Nirankari bhavans, when Sant Ji marches off for that, all of these morcha, he was ready and he was doing it thus, like whether it's the arrest in, you know, 1981, ਜਦੋਂ ਮੇਰਤਾ ਤੋਂ ਜਦੋਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਗ੍ਰਿਫਤਾਰੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ, Sant Ji says an ardas to the sangat that like ਕਿੱਥੇ ਇਸ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ if this useless body can be used in panthik seva ardas ਕਰੋ pe meri, like, you know, essentially Shaheedi. So Sant Ji is doing Shaheedi das all the way through, and you know, so like that's a bit of a like it's a bit unfortunate. But what we need to see is that from 78, Sant Ji had put himself in that position, like in the, you know, on the battlefield to like.
Yeah.
So with the Nirankaris, they fully overreached because the government's assessment at that time was that Sikhs are convinced with this project of Indianness, and like after 47 they've been convinced that, you know, the nation is now free. Sikhs have contributed to the freedom of the Indian state, and Sikhs are fulfilled this brave role of being like the soldiers, the warriors of India, and they thought that transition was completely successful. So when Nirankari, like where Baljit Singh starts off, is the Nirankaris were pushed to attack a certain expression of Sikhi, which is the Khalsa expression of Sikhi, and in doing that they completely overreached, because the thing is when they cross that line of Biadabi, that is the line of tolerance for a lot of Sikhs. So when they cross that line of Biadabi and the way in which Guru Bachana carries out this Biadabi, what he says, what he does, all of his actions, the support of the government in them openly massacring Sikhs in such a way, and then them brazenly letting them off on the court case, it shows just how far they were willing to go, and they overplay their hand in that instant. And in many ways, they create they create a space for any kind of emergent leadership to fill. And Sant Jarnail Singh like takes that tiny bit of space and just creates a huge amount of space for like Sikhs to exist in a militant formation outside of the control of the state, and that creates a massive problem of rebellion that obviously culminates in June 1984. This whole thing is building on a certain trajectory, but it's that little bit of a gap that they left, and what ends up happening is the Punjabi word is amandar, like leadership that is very clear in its objectives, leadership that is genuine and is about asserting Sikhs' right to dignity and confronting state violence, confronting you know, anything that infringes upon that they want to live a dignified life. And also that Amandar leadership then just completely, because now you've got like this emotionally charged environment where the Sikhs have been killed by, you know, the state-sponsored cult, and now people are looking for an expression of that's a bit more radical, that allows them to, you know, get their claim of revenge that they want to have in that time. And that's what you see, like that bubbles up and that builds, and it becomes like an all-out armed movement against the Indian state, and it's their ego that drags them to that position. And you see that in like Sant Jarnail Singh's arrest, the way like the Indian state thinks that this problem is limited to Sant Jarnail Singh, that Sant Jarnail Singh is like the focal point of it, that outside Sant Jarnail Singh there's nothing, that if this individuals are removed from the public, that this whole thing is going to collapse, because they couldn't see anything beyond him. So then in
1981 it might have done.
Yeah, so in 1981 they issue an arrest for Sant Jarnail Singh, and I'll pass over to Baljit Singh to explain exactly what happens.
One thing we forgot to mention as well is that when Sant Ji started this morcha against the Nirankari Bhavans to get them closed across Punjab, the Singhs were very successful with that, and all the Bhavans did get closed down. And although Singha ne girftariyan bhi dittiyan, later though, however, that year in Kanpur in September 1978, the Sikhs that went to protest against the Nirankari Jalus and the program that was happening there, utthe 13 Singh utthe bhi shaheed hoye. And then later a protest in Delhi, 3 Singhs were also shot by the police and they were killed. So it wasn't as if this was like a one-off event. So like it was this almost this kind of like challenge by the Sarkar. I think one of the things we were saying earlier, that as we were kind of meeting that challenge, they were trying to like kind of increase the brutality. And I think you were talking about how Singha no dalil kitta Sikh Kanpur.
Oh yeah, they cut their case in the Kanpur massacre, and what you see like continuously is not just the fact that they're killing Sikhs, is that they're cutting their case. And you see that again in like Delhi in November 84, just the way in which Sikhs are targeted. Sikh men's case are cut. At one point they pull down a photo of Guru Ram Das Ji at a train station. This happens, they target Gurdwara, schools, etc., because they've made the Nishana Sikhi itself. And that's significant that you see in Kanpur massacre, because you see that in Amritsar, earlier that year, कि ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ case car ਲਾਏ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, like, you know, they basically strip the Singhs naked and cut their case and leave them on the floor.
Did they urinate? Or was that another one?
That was in Kanpur. Yeah, they cut their case and they urinated on them. And even in November, when the photo of Guru Ram Das Ji is pulled down from the train station, the mobs urinate and defecate on the photograph. So it's just like that. It's that some scholars have described it as this underlying genocidal impulse that exists within India, and it comes out in multiple different moments, and it targets different communities. Muslims have been on the receiving end of it. Sikhs have been on the receiving end of it, where the Indian media describes it as public outrage and communal anger. After Indira Gandhi's assassination, that's how it's described. Like there's this outpouring of communal anger. Yeah. But I would name that more accurately as like this underlying Hindu rage that then targets and makes Sikhs and Sikhi the nishana of it. And when you see incidences like that where Sikhs' case is cut, or like, photograph of Guru Ram Das Ji is desecrated, or cults are sponsored and supported and given police protection, diplomatic immunity, they massacre Sikhs and then they let off court cases, it shows. And again, Sant Jarnail Singh Lagatar, as part of their katha, narrates multiple incidences of this, and over multiple years, like specific incidences that demonstrate that the government is in favor of the majority community, and the Sikhs within this setup have no rights. The constitution doesn't apply to us, as Vijay was saying earlier, that they're treated as second-class citizens. And Sant Jarnail Singh names this dynamic, कि तुसी भारत अंदर गुलाम है, that you as a Sikh now are subjugated under Bharat. There's no way of avoiding this, and until every mai, pai, pan, pra, like Buzurg realizes that tusi Bharat andar gulam, then until you realize that you're a slave within this setup, that you have no claim to sovereignty or Padshai, then until that realization happens, then how can you fight for Azadi? And he constantly talks about that point, he hammers that point home. And then he also, in the same vein, he talks against like peaceful protests. He talks against the politics of Akali Dal, the politics of like saying one thing and doing another, the politics of compromise. And he leads the Sangat through this journey. But like Vaisakhi and Kanpur and Delhi and in 78 are all of these significant kind of moments. And then following that, you see like following Sant Ji's arrest in 1981, you see the Shaheed of Bhai Kalwan Singh Nagoke and other Shaheediyan that happened that again reinforce this position, this reality of what this relationship between the Sikh and the Indian state is.
Plus, I think I'll just like to touch before we move on to Sanji's arrest. By this time in 1980s, January time, Indira Gandhi becomes country's prime minister again in 1980s. And then any action that is happening against the Nirankari by the Sikhs, actually the government is taking it very personally because it was a sect supported and built up by the government itself to, within the Sikhi and then try and portray another sort of image of us. And whatever was happening, as I said, they were actually taking that as a challenge. So the term will be like the kundak, or the gussa, or the disparity between Sikh community and the Indian state was actually getting far and beyond. By this time, the Indian state is now, convinced that we will have to shut these people up at some point. So I think by this time is when Indian intelligence or deep state is now trying to get more details on how we gonna, disseminate this movement that's this uprising, as they would like to call it, within Sikhs, because they're gaining confidence, they're gaining like a structure of a parallel government in Punjab. Before things get out of hand, we need to nip things in the bud, and that's what they are preparing themselves now.
One thing's important to note, as when the things we're talking about the Nirankaris as well, is throughout this cycle of violence where the Nirankaris, aided by the police, are shooting and brutalizing Sikh Sangata, and Singhs are becoming Shaheed. The government's fully supporting them, fully backing them. And it was during this period that Lala Jagnaran, who was a media baron and had like some of the main newspapers at this time, and had opened up a Punjabi daily newspaper just to support the Nirankaris. So he was seen as someone who he was actually a guest at the Nirankari Jalus of 78 in Vaisakhi as well. And so he was fully with the Nirankaris, fully supporting them. And his words were inciting like right-wing Hindu organizations and the Nirankaris to commit further kind of atrocities upon Sikh. So it was following that. And one of the last incidents that happened with him was that he, I think it was the Kartar Jathedar that had traveled to America and spoken to kind of like what they would call like, Panthic Gursikhs in America that were like advocating for like an independent state at the time. And Lala Jagnaran in the press said that they're Gaddars and stuff, like they for India, that they're Gaddars and stuff. And Sant Ji said that like it's just Kartar Jathedar, and he's speaking about him like this. This is one of the kind of last straws. But mainly it was because he had like testified against the Singhs and helped the Nirankaris get acquitted. So because he was a staunch supporter, and because his words were kind of creating so much issues and turmoil in Punjab, Sant Ji dispatched by Dalbir Singh Abhyasi, by Nashatra Singh Rodde, and by Swaran Singh Rodde to assassinate him. So they went on a motorcycle, and that's where the legend of the motorcycle motorcycle wale jehde that utthon shuru hoya si. And at this time also the Babbar Singhs that we mentioned as well, like they were carrying out actions as well against Panth Dukhis and Dushts. So once Lala Jagnaran gets assassinated, and this is an interesting point because he gets assassinated in September 81, and he was a massive Congress, like he's a former Congress leader and etc. So this idea of Sant Ji being Congress, the fact that he has a huge part in the decimation of the Nirankaris, again a Congress creation, the central government at the time, and Lala Jagnaran kind of completely dispels that myth. But in pursuance of that assassination, Sant Ji, who's at Haryana at this point, part of his Gurmat Prachar in Chandon Kala, they were there. So when the assassination happens, I think it was by one of the Singhs that were involved in the hit came to Haryana, told Sant Ji, listen, we've got to go back to Punjab now because this has happened. So then Sant Ji travelled with some Guru Sikhs back to Punjab to Mehta, the headquarters of obviously the Dhamdam at that time, and the police with a force of like 5,000 SSP Patti, like they like a huge kind of paramilitary police force arrives at Chandokala, where there's some members of the Taksal are still there. And when they didn't, essentially they wanted to encounter Sant Ji there outside of Punjab. And when they didn't find him there, they were enraged. They fired for like 8 hours, and they looted the place. They beat the men and the women as well. And then they robbed them for all this stuff they had. And the worst thing that they did was that there was 2 buses of the Taksal, which they would use to do their obviously prachar and travel. And obviously there was Gurbani, there was Sentia, and they burnt them down. So that was like a massive, Sant Ji, he was really upset about this and stuff like that. They could have done anything they wanted to me about why did they touch the Gurbani and things. So at this point, Sant Ji's in Mehta, right?
Yeah, Sant Ji arrives back at Mehta Chowk, and even that's like a legend of like how did 5000 ਦੇ ਘੇਰੇ ਵਿੱਚੋਂ how did Sant escape from Chandokala, which is Haryana, all the way back to Mehta, and they had Naki on every single main road. And even that, I think, if Singhs in the Jatha talk about how much of an amazing story that is. I think the Singh that was the driver, driver Gurumukh Singh got Shaheed in the attack as well. He drove Sant Ji back, and it was quite like there was a lot of abhyas, there was a lot of nama abhyas, and they had to take every back road. But they managed to get back from Chandokala back to Mehta, despite every single main road having a police naka. Sant Ji gets back to Mehta. The next day they go to do Darshan Nishnan, Harmandir Sahib, and they speak to the Jathedar. ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਫੈਸਲਾ ਕਰਕੇ, I believe the Jathedar at the time was Gurdial Singh Ajnuha. Gurdial Singh Ajnuha is someone of a high Gurmat caliber. Gurdial Singh Ajnuha is the person that eventually does an ardas. ਕਿ ਜਿੰਨੀ ਮੇਰੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਰਹਿੰਦੀ ਆ ਸੰਤਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਂ ਤੇ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਵੇ. And not long after he passes away, and there's a great prem between Gurudayal Singh Ajnuha and Sant Ji. So he said like he gave his like rendi hui life to Sant. He's like, I can't do what Sant Ji is doing, but I value it so much. Yeah, meri umr ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਲੱਗ ਜਾਵੇ.
But in 1981, at this point, Sant Ji had such a profile, and the reason why we're speaking about Sant Ji a lot as well, because it helps explain the context of the attack later on. But he has such a huge support base in Punjab that now they're stuck because they want to try and encounter him outside of Punjab where they would have been easier for them. But now that he's back in Punjab, they spend a few days before they try to speak to Sant Ji. And they actually arrested many members of the Taksal, including Baba Takhat Singh Ji, at Chandokala. So they were using that as a kind of a thing as well. And by Manbir Singh Chehdu was one of the Singhs as well that was also arrested. And when they then speak to Sant Ji says that he would court arrest, like they said that we want to do your giriftari and stuff. And even before they spoke to Sant Ji, the government had got clearance through Indira Gandhi to contact the army. So General Sinha, SK Sinha speaks about this in his book, and this is why a lot of the things, a lot of people talk about how they were trying to do this way before Sant Ji even got into the Darbar Sahib. So they actually requested from the army tanks. Yeah. So even at 1981, and A Soldier Recalls is his book, his memoirs. He writes about how in 1981, he had been given orders to send tanks. And he basically refused those orders, and then they were said to him that, how can you refuse orders? He goes, no, I'm just saying I want to put my observations in front of the Prime Minister. And when he requested that, they refused it, and then they denied that. Then they cancelled the whole thing. But in 1981, in September, they wanted to issue tanks because they were in Naurad Singato Darasiga that this is going to be there's going to be a massive standoff in 81. That they had issued, they were trying to, that Indira Gandhi tried to order tanks to to facilitate the arrest of Sant Ji. When that failed, they basically spoke to Sant Ji and said, how can we do this, innit? Like, we've got all your people arrested as well, like, Kirpa Karo essentially, innit? And Sant Ji said that I'm going to give arrest on this specific date, and I want an Amritari Singh in the police that's going to come, and when I get arrested, I want to go to the Darbar Sahib and do Ardas there first. And when they came to arrest Sant Ji, Sant Ji speaks, does a massive speech. There's like all the Panthic leaders there, like the leader of the Delhi Prabandhak Committee, Jathedar Sant Jarnail Singh there, all the like, Bhai Fauja Singh Ji, obviously, even I think Tarna Dal, Karn Singh, I think is there as well. A lot of like Sikh kind of leaders were there. The one person that wasn't there was Badal, because when he arrived at the train station, he was because Sant was annoyed and angry with Badal from 78, and that relationship never kind of mended because he still carried that kind of grievance against Badal. So essentially, all the leaders there, Sant Ji speaks, and when he's going to get arrested, this is what I was saying earlier, that like at any point they're anticipating Shaheed. So he's wearing a Kesi Dastar, and he says in the speech, he goes, some of the brothers have said to me that tu Khalistani ban gaya, like you're wearing a Kesi Dastar. He goes, no, he goes, when you jadon viaida, like Kesi banne and stuff. He goes, hopefully Indira or Patti or like these naming of the police officers, hopefully they've got someone like a Granthi there to read the lawa for me, because like I'm ready in it, right. For Maharaj and stuff to take Shaheed. And so he's arrested and taken away. And then the police force that were there, I think they were led by the commanding officer was actually Adwal, DIG Avtar Adwal, and that name's gonna be important later on. And they basically open a fire. Once Sant Ji leaves, they open fire on the Sangat and stuff. And nothing would 18 Shaheed हुए सीगे. So another round of like Shaheediyan happened again in 18 Sikh Shaheed हुए सीगे.
So they've arrested Sant Ji, but they're still let fire.
Even though he peacefully courts arrest, and then he's taken to Farid Court jail.
Yeah, and Sant Ji, even in the speech, Sant Ji says, "Let them take me. I'm not resisting arrest." The fear of inni sangat vich, there's a theme here, isn't it? Opening fire on Sangata. I know there's a theme now emerging, and it really is.
And Sant Ji said as well in the speech, he goes, I challenge the government to try and keep me detained. He goes that like I want, like I'll try to keep me detained. He goes with the handcuffs or not, I'll be back to it. And just before Sant Ji, this happens, a few days before this, like members of the Babbar Khalsa, it was Jathedar Talwinder Singh, Jathedar Sukhdev Singh Ji Babbar, Bhai Tarsem Singh Ji was there. I'm pretty sure Bhai Kulwant Singh Ji Nagoke were there. They met Sant Ji and they said to him that, listen, don't court arrest. You shouldn't call arrest. And he goes, let me ardas kiti, I've said it, I'm going to do it. And then Sant Ji says to the Babbar Singhs, he goes, Tusi lalle da mull dekhya ki ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੇ ਪਾਇਆ. Like you've seen the value they've placed on Lalla, that they've ਇੰਨੀ ਬਿਆਦਵੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ, ਗੁਰੂ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੀ ਬਿਆਦਵੀ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ, they Maharaj's Gurbani and like Chando Kala. He goes, Singho ਤੁਸੀਂ ਮੇਰਾ ਮੁੱਲ ਕੀ ਪਾਉਣਾ? And then the Babbar Singh said to Sant Ji, goes, Sant Ji ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੱਲ ਨੂੰ ਨਾ ਅਖਬਾਰਾਂ ਚ ਪੜਾਂਗੇ, like what the value we put on you. And the next day, so this is a super interesting part of history as well. And again, this is what allows for this conspiracy that Sant Ji is a Congress agent. Because as we know, Sant Ji is released within a matter of weeks. And the reason he's released, and Zail Singh says in Parliament that, there's no evidence against him. And then that's used to say, Zail Singh Congress, that they released him as innocent. And then obviously, Sikh weekend there, but Sant Ji was innocent. And the reason why that lends into this conspiracy that he was Congress is because obviously other Sikhs don't have that kind of benefit, right? Other Sikhs are tortured in jail and they're Shaheed in jail. How is Sant Ji released in it just because he's innocent or whatever? But the truth is, the next day, there's firing across Punjab. The Babbar Khalsa Singhs, led by Jathedar Talwinder Singh on one side and Jathedar Sukhdev Singh Ji on the other side of Punjab, they like eliminate anti-Sikh targets, Nirankari targets, they attack the police. The Dal Khalsa hijack planes, and the Sikh Student Federation led by Amrik Singh Ji, they did a bombing campaign which targeted like the officers that did the Biadvi, Chandokala, and various other kind of targets. But the bombs were like, they weren't like intended to kill anyone. It was like, the ammunition wasn't that much, but it was a show of force. So with literally within a week or two, you have all across Punjab, like there's planes being hijacked, there's shootings, there's bombings, and that's where the government were like, because there's Congress government in Punjab at the time. They're like, what the hell is happening in it? And stuff. So in their kind of, I obviously believe that they made a mistake at this point, because they decided, listen, let's release him, and it's not worth this kind of thing, and like all this kind of thing. So they release him, and even in the jail, they had to par a kand in the jail because there was so many visitors coming to see Sant Ji. Utte the langar lag gaya siga and stuff. So it was just, and even when they released him, that there was no legal basis on releasing him. They had to like technically even in June, Sant Ji was on bail because they didn't like, so they had to kind of like make some sort of like bodge his kind of release because they had no grounds to release him, but they had to release him. Both Singhs jor inna siga that they had to release Sant Ji. But when we ignore this side, this Jujaru side of the laird and stuff, that's when it kind of, you know, you think to yourself, why did they release Sant Ji? Because writers purposefully, even Sikh writers, like omit all of this kind of militancy, all of this kind of armed kind of like actions that led to his release.
And then the narratives that's presented, even among Sikhs, is that Sant Ji was released because he was innocent, that Sant Ji didn't have an FIR against him. And that's problematic for a number of reasons, but because it presents it doesn't present the nature of the conflict that Sant Jarnail Singh was engaging in, or the Sikhs were engaging in. It wasn't a question of the Indian state's law or its judiciary. It's a question of Sikhs asserting their Badshahi, taking up armed positions and going from civil disobedience and like morche to save democracy that we saw in like 1975 with the emergency to like open rebellion against the state. And you see all of that being ushered in around for immediately following 1978. That's the impact that those Shaheediyan have on the whole kind of landscape in Punjab, and the way these Sikhs emerge from within the Sangat. It's telling of what they valued at that time, and how they sought to exert themselves within the political space of Punjab. Because you've got to understand is all of the space was now restricted. There's no outlet for Sikhs, and you see that is immediately following the Darbar Sahib attack as well. When all of the space on the ground is completely restricted, you've got no avenue, then Sikhs had to create alternative spaces for themselves. And you see that we'll go into a lot more detail on that on the next episode about June.
I know we've said that, but Shamsher Singh just said, you know, like we often lead into the Sant Ji innocent, Sant Ji is innocent in that regard. Of course, Sant Jarnail Singh Ji is innocent. Of course, they've demonized Sikhs and they've demonized Sikh characters, and of course, this state has not failed. It's purposely failed. It's purposely failed, which has given avenue to the things that Baljit Singh is talking about, right? It was their incapability to deal with the Gurbatina trial. There's an incapability to get justice for that within their own realms, as is the case for all of the other kind of times that the Singhs are open, like subject to open fire. So if we want to make that clear, Sant Ji is innocent in that regard, but by our terms, but
as a Sikh, he's completely innocent,
of course, but absolutely. And
as an Indian citizen,
and we've and Baji could strip down the Indian like kind of law for Sikhs, or the koi nahi innocent in it by theirs, isn't it? You know, famously Sant Jarnail Singh Ji says ki main haan main atavadi vi main vakhwadi vi, right? So by their terminology, isn't it? I think that's what Shamsher Singh we're trying to say is we're not going to get into their terminology of it. So whilst I think it's fine if people present this argument of Sant Jarnail Singh Ji given on idna kita, and we're going to go into the attack later. It wasn't about Sant Ji. It wasn't about the Sant Ji's hatiyars and things like this. They could have done this, they could have done that. We will go into those things because they are still relevant in terms of to further expose the demonic position of the state. But it's not the complete story. The complete story is what we're hearing today.
And the thing is that one thing is interesting as well is that every time like these sakya are happening, Sant Ji's using this as an opportunity to do prachar. So he was saying, when the Gurbachana assassination happens, he was saying that like, you know, if Jamno Shaheed kara, then they're like, it's brilliant because like jo prachar thode samay chhona si like badde padar te ho gaya. So even at the 81 speech, Sant Ji when he gets arrested in Metta, Sant Ji saying continuously that message that KST Nishan Sahib thale echo to all the Nojawan, like get together under the Nishan Sahib and walk forward. And the other thing is obviously this is getting reported. And his responses are getting reported, and it's the Sangat are like taking this in like in a really aspiring way because like in response to like the Akali Dal's kind of like petitions and like memorandums and legal kind of things which haven't worked. Obviously, you got to remember like there's been failed morcha after morcha, right? Like the Punjabi Subha was a failure. Sant Fateh Singh, they'd done hunger fast, they failed, didn't go through with it, and suddenly you got someone. I think Bhai Fauja Singh was talking about how when Sant Ji gets arrested for the Lala Jagannath assassination, he's asked a number of questions. And
yeah, I think, this was another thing about Sant Ji. People used to think he's a village guy and he cannot articulate much. But he was so witty, even on his Dastar Bandi. I'm going to go back a little. When Akali Dal Pradhan came in and was like, Sant Ji, je inna nu kuch bhi chahiਦਾ hoya sade to mang liyo. And then when Sant Ji spoke on the stage, and Sant Ji said, ਅਸੀਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਕਿਸ ਤੋਂ ਕੁਛ ਮੰਗਦੇ, ਜੇ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਕੁਛ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਹੋਇਆ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸ ਦੇਣ, ਹੈ ਨਾ. ਸੋ ਕਹਿਣ ਤੋਂ ਭਾਵ ਇਹ ਵੀ he was so witty. The questions he was asked was like, how much hatiyar you have? And it was like, you should know, you must have issued the license. The state should know about all this. He was very clever about all the questions. There was like 40 odd questions, and they couldn't get anything against him out of his answers, but he was telling the truth though, but they couldn't get against him or could not hold anything against him from his answers.
And everything that was happening, like I think it was India Today that, after his arrest, like they published this article and they said that, like, out of all of this, the Akalis are losers, the Congress are losing, and they obviously call him Pindaroy. Pindaroy was the only winner and stuff. Because all of these things are getting reported in the press, like the questions, and they asked him, how many kinne tode hatiyar hege? And he goes, the number of licensed gun holders there are in Punjab, that's how many weapons I have, because if we ask for them, no one's going to say no. So that way, ਸਾਡੇ ਕੋਲ ਇੰਨੀ support ਹੈ, ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਕੋਲ ਵੀ ਹਥਿਆਰ ਹੈ, if we ask for them, that's how many we've got in it.
Was there a story of them in court where they asked them to swear oath?
Of course, that's true. Like,
and they switched that as well.
Each opportunity Sant Ji used to, like, make these points. Like when they asked him in this court case, when he was in jail, to like swear on, I think on a Gurkha Sahib, and Sant Ji says, but you classify us as Hindu though, so get the Gita, innit? And they had this thing for 3 days, and in the end they had to cancel the swearing of the oath.
I think one another thing that we need to realize, by this time, a lot of the Naujwani in Punjab is changing. A lot of the people are taking Amrit.
Yeah.
They're turning up to Diwans. So government is actually faring. I mean, their agenda is either assimilate them or eliminate them.
Yes.
And because you are the biggest sort of hindrance in their one nation theory, and we will talk about that when we talk about today's scenario. And that is actually, it's opposite is happening. What they tried to do with Gurbachana and the Nirankaris was to actually, marginalize and fractionalize Sikhs. But it's happening the other way around. Now the Sikhs are getting together under one Nishan Sahib, and then they're taking Amrit, and the Naujwani is growing more and more, and plus there's a very positive kind of vibe in their head. Now, one question I think we all need to ask ourselves, if in 84 Sant Ji was the only target, they could have actually had him in 81. The state wanted to prove a point. They wanted to prove a point by attacking Akaal Takhat. They wanted to prove a point. They were just waiting for the right opportunity. Plus, it gave them 3 years to make us and label us anti-national, that we are colluding with Pakistan, and a lot of hatiyar has come from Pakistan and everything. We'll talk more on that in 84. But that's what I'm trying to say, is that the state is actually playing a game. And with everything that Sant Ji used to say, for example, one of his speech has become very famous for the wrong reasons and the right reasons, is like, I think it was the Indian government's home minister at that time, which said that Sikhan nu ਇਹ ਸੋਚ ਕੇ ਕੰਮ ਕਰਨਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ, cause Punjab ਤੋਂ ਬਾਹਰ ਇੰਨੇ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੰਨੇ ਹਿੰਦੂ ਪੈਂਦੇ ਨੇ. So basically trying to give us an indirect ਧਮਕੀ, ਹੈ ਨਾ, that ਕਿ ਬਾਹਰ ਕੀ ਹੋਊਗਾ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ. And when Sant Ji said this off stage, is like, ਜੇ ਇੱਕ ਹੋਮ ਮਿਨਿਸਟਰ ਆਪਣੀ ਕੰਟਰੀ 'ਚ ਖੁੱਲ੍ਹੇਆਮ ਡਿਸਕ੍ਰਿਮੀਨੇਸ਼ਨ ਕਰ ਸਕਦਾ, ਤੇ ਪਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਇਹੀ ਗੱਲ ਮੈਂ ਕਹਿੰਦਾ ਵਾਂ ਤੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਐਂਟੀ ਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਬਣਾ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਨੇ. So do you understand, like, if a Hindu commits a crime, it's kind of like some community issue. But if Sikh does anything to defend himself, then it becomes terrorism. So that's and it's still very valid. This kind of psyche is still very valid. Like, for example, we've introspected this question that why was Sant Ji labeled as Congress, somebody from Congress? Because the thing is, for them, Akali Dal was the best sort of institution to represent Sikhs, because they can control them. And Sant Ji, on a parallel, his popularity was growing many folds as compared to Akali Dal. And he was at a point where he was actually dictating his terms to Akali Dal, and they had to follow him because they didn't want it to get out of fashion. So, I mean, for them, and even this happens even now, कोई भी उठदा पंथ दा बंदा चाहे वो दीप सिद्धू होए चाहे अमृतपाल होए, everybody starts saying कि ਇਹ government agent है, and that's what he's doing, a government agent है. ਜਦ ਤੱਕ ਕੌਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬੰਦਾ ਕੋਈ ਸ਼ਹੀਦ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋ ਜਾਂਦਾ, ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਦੀ loyalty ਤੇ ਸ਼ੱਕ ਹੀ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ till the end, and this is what our problem is, and I think we need to kind of introspect that.
It was different with Sant Ji though, like when Sant Ji was alive, like the Aam Sangat didn't have any questions.
Didn't suspect him.
Not
there
suspect.
was a propaganda
not
though,
suspect, but it was propaganda, but the propaganda was coming from outside. It was coming from the newspapers. Like internally within the Sikh community, Sant Jarnail Singh was in that position of leadership because of his character and his nature, and nobody, nobody. It wasn't the same dynamic that you see today. You get opposite, which Sikhs might have like disagreements, and they'll be like, you're a government agent, etc. It was a completely different vibe, I think. Then
the difficulty with Sant Ji as well for the government is that when you have someone with that kind of kamai, he's completely fearless. Like he's beyond kind of bribery, like the Akali Dal, they just want to have seats and positions of power and etc. So you can't bribe him. He's not. He does ardas for Shaheedi. What can you do to this person? And that's the thing. Like he was difficult for them to kind of control.
And with Sant Ji, there's this like explicit rejection as well, which you can study from like a theoretical point of view, and like today we will say like, Sant Ji wasn't a terrorist because this is what he was doing and it was right according to morals and principles or whatever. But Sant Ji's position at that time was, if doing XYZ and prachar and that makes me a terrorist, then I'm a terrorist and you should all become terrorists like me. Like there's an explicit rejection. He didn't get caught in that trap of trying to justify his position, because according to the definitions of the law, according to the setup of the Indian state and its allies, Sant Jarnail Singh is a terrorist. And but when we say that he's not a terrorist, we're trying to invalidate or trying to make a moral argument on a system that very clearly has these lines where individuals do not have the right to pick up arms and wage war against the state.
So rather so we should make the argument less so the innocence by legal definition, because we've seen because Sant Ji in their time is drawing out unfitting parallels, the hijacking of the hijacking by Gajendra Singh versus say the hijacking done for Indira Gandhi post electoral fraud, and how they're treated differently. So Sant Ji is saying that the rule of the land here, it's flawed. Therefore, I understand we can't get too much into the nitting picking of give FIR and what we should get more into is by our definition of morals. We present Sant Jarnail Singh Ji. So, Baji said there was a picture of a kid that he was very much inspired by. This Bacha se utte at the Akaal Tak Sahib. I'm jumping ahead when Sant Ji's moved, and he's very happy. And so this nature of like a demonic person that the media has tried to present is absolutely untrue. In fact, the Akaal Tak Sahib at the time had a free press. National and international news outlets could go and interview Sant Jarnail Singh Ji. There's been more interviews by national and international press of Sant Jarnail Singh Ji at Akaal Takht alone than the current sitting Indian Prime Minister. He's allowed no free press. Nobody else gets to ask him any questions, national, domestic or internationally. More people ask Sant Jarnail Singh Ji questions, right? And then that's irrespective of whether they were Subramanian Swami, whether they were people from a Hindu background or whatever. So what we're trying to present more is the character of Sant Jarnail Singh Ji, and that speaks for itself rather than get into which is something that
we're never going to really do justice to as well, because like we're talking about,
hence why these things are like 3 hours
100%, and we're looking at this through this perspective of like the Sangharsh and 84, but like there's another angle to it in terms of like when Sant Ji's morcha first starts, when he first becomes Jathedar and he's doing Gurmat Prachar, like independent stuff, like who's it's an economist who spoke about it, who wrote the book about the Green Revolution, Vandana Shiva. She writes that like that his first huge support base was like women, because he was turning because that's the thing is like some of these things are taboo to talk about now, but Sant Ji was talking about pornography like in the 70s and saying that it's a massive evil and stuff, and he was turning like people away from these ills and evils and stuff into like go to Sikhi. So she was saying like the Vandana Shiva was saying that like the first support base for them were the women and stuff, because they saw that their households were like better off because obviously their Singhs were becoming like Amritari and things. And there's so many
less alcoholics, less abusive relationships. Like these are like samajik issues that Sant Jarnail Singh Ji is tackling.
Even with the Hindus and stuff, like there's so many Sakhis. There's so many Sakhis that like even his opponents, like Kushwant Singh.
Yes.
His opponent, like he was there. He's there like at the time Sant Ji was there, and he's in the Sangat when a Hindu woman came to Sant Ji and said that her in-laws were causing a lot of problems and they were like threatening her because they wanted more dowry. And Sant Ji said that are you the daughter of a Brahmin, innit? And she said yes. And he goes, would you be like the daughter of a Sikh for a day? And she said yes. And then so he said okay, he said to the Singhs, he goes, go get her in-laws, innit? And then Kushwant Singh says like a short while after, like this family trio comes in and they're like terrified looking at the Singhs. And the Sant Ji goes, is this your his daughter-in-law? And they go yes. And then Sant Ji gets a tal and he goes, I heard you want dowry, and he goes, take how much of you want. And they said like Bedi Beg, seen it, like Sant Ji, forgive us. And then Sant Ji said, I don't want to hear any complaints. So they obviously misrepresent him and they don't show that side of him as well. And like there's a huge aspect of where he would samaj, like we were saying.
Yeah, a big part of that movement was addressing social issues like what you mentioned, like alcoholism, pornography, issues of dowry, which is like a big problem. And that, and his massive support base from Punjab was based on those issues because they were actually being resolved from that ਜਿੱਥੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕੀਤੀ ਸਰਬੱਤ ਦੇ ਭਲੇ ਦਾ ਰਾਜ, like as part of it, even you see that same spirit in like the farmers protest as part of Sikh trying to agitate for their demands, or ਲੋਕਾਂ ਦਾ ਵੀ ਭਲਾ ਕਰ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਇੰਨੇ ਦਿਆਲੂ ਸਿੱਖ ਗੁਰੂ.
Right. Well, we've spoken a lot of topics right now, especially we've put a lot of emphasis on Sant Ji, as we need to, just to give context to, especially when it comes to the next podcast on the Sukha of June 84. Just to give a quick recap, just so everybody's following, especially the viewers as well, in terms of timeline. So we've talked about 1978, we've talked about Nirankaris and what's happened there. We've spoken about the assassination of Guru Bachana as well. We spoke about after that Kanpur as well, that happened in 1970, was that 1980 as well? 1978. We talked about if you look for the Sikh response, we talked about Sant Ji's arrest in 1981 and a lot about Sant Ji's personality and all the contributions that they made in many different ways and different facets. And then did we touch upon Bhai Fauja Singh Ji as well?
So just to recap, we were speaking about Sant Ji's arrest in 81 and how there was like this huge wave of from the Naujawan in releasing Sant Ji. Later that year in October, the Babur Khalsa attack the sectariat. So like we know in 1995 like Byantas killed in the sectariat, like, but in the 80s they also attacked it, and very much in the same way in police officer uniforms. And in there, I think the DC gets injured but his brother dies, and the DC is the one who was obviously who had organized the Sukha. So that is still happening. So in terms of the underground movement that's taking place at the moment, that's still happening. So all these kind of issues and this activity is coming to a point where then the Dehedu happens. This is one of the first actual real muqabale, like the real shootout with the police. This happens in the bend of Dehedu, and the police officers get a tip off that by Amarjit Singh Khemkaran and by Tarsem Singh Kala Sangya are there, and they had just a few days before this had like taken out a few other Nirankari targets. So by Amarjit Singh and by Tarsem Singh are there, and the police force come and they like surround this house, and I believe it's Bibbiji, who was the Singhini of by Amarjit Singh Dehedu. She warns the Singhs and saying like, police agi, whatever. And as the police officers are coming up the stairs, uno board la that they're going to be able to apprehend these things, and obviously it's going to be a huge kind of scalp for them. And the Singhs say to say to him, as Bajwa, Inspector Bajwa, that tu nangaja, you should return in it because we're gonna obviously take you out if you continue. But he didn't want to carry on coming, and the Singhs, it was just two Singhs, and they shot him and the constable, and they both died. And later on, Sant Ji speaks about this, and he was saying that obviously, especially when the era comes of what we're going to talk about Bhai Fauja Singh, when there was a false encounters where the police presented a shootout, it just never took place. So Sant Ji talks about this encounter and says that this was the true encounter, and he goes, "There's only two Singhs, and the rest of the police, why were you hiding underneath like all the like bales of hay and stuff?" And he spoke about that, and there were obviously Dharmic Geet were then sang about those two surme. So it was in this wave of a militant activity that was taking place that Bhai Fauja Singh Ji Nagoke, who was like a really, really Chadikla Gursikh, who was also a Sathi of Bhai Fauja Singh, had spent time at Khalsa farm. He was one of the founding members of the Babbar Khalsa, and alongside with like Gurmat Prachar initiatives under the Chalda Vihir, where he was part of the Panj, who were shakaying Amrit to like tens of thousands of people across Punjab. At the same time, he was involved in Hathiar Band Sangharsh with Babbar Khalsa Singhs, and had taken out like several targets. In fact, there's a Gursikh from the UK who went to see him in Punjab, and this was early in the 80s, and he said that or they like kind of like his eyes were red, and he was pacing, and he was saying that like, if I can get hold of weaponry, he goes, I will Nirankari Punjab I'll get rid of them myself. And he was, according to like an informant, the police tip off, he was arrested, and it was his Shaheedi, which was the first by the police force in that way in Punjab following the partition. That was a major then like a further kind of turning point in where things became a way more openly kind of like this takrar with the state. The armed sangharsh took even like a further kind of went up a further stage.
Bhai Fauja Singh Nagoke was brutally tortured when he was arrested, and his torture marked a turning point in how the police was dealing with Sikhs. Now they were openly engaging in like really brutal methods, and then when they tortured him and they killed him, they presented his body as like Baljit Singh was saying, as an encounter, that he was escaping and we had to kill him. And that justification you'd see being repeated for the following decade onwards. But Sant Jarnail Singh mentions Bhai Fauja Singh Nagoke during their funeral, about how he's seen his body and there's like point blank bullet marks on
steel rods.
Steel rods were inserted into his legs, and like basically is. And
this had like a major like impact on the Sangha thing. So these are huge, because these individuals like Bhai Fauja Singh, they were like legends in Punjab. So tens of thousands of people would have turned out for his sanskar, and his family talk about how they took him from police station to police station. I don't think the family was saying that they didn't believe that the police were trying to actually kill him. It was like but they had tortured him so much because they were trying to find out information about the other things, the Babbar Khalsa, who were still unnamed, and they were still like underground. They were trying to find out information, that they tortured him so far that and in fact it was like a doctor from one of the neighboring prinds who gave testimony to say that they brought him Bhai Sahib's body to the doctor. He was still breathing, and they said that like can you save him? And then he said like like he's he was so bad, and it was so much so that doctor actually went to go to the sanskar himself, because he said that I want to go and pay respects to in that like a surma in that. And Bhai Sahib's son also speaks about this, and his family, that when they were trying to find Bhai Sahib and trying to like find out which police station they were at, they were moving him from station to station, something that we see later on in the movement as well. That when his family, it was his son with some of the members of the Panchayat of the Pind Nagoke, find him at a police station, the police officers won't let them speak to Bhai Fauja Singh. And the people that were there, like from the Pind Nagoke, the Sarpanch, they said to the police officers that like have some pity on his son. His son was Bhai Sukhdev Singh, his young son at the time. I think he was about 7 years old. And they said that at least let him see them.
Like his son, they said to him, let him see him, and like as you're saying, he's like a really young kid, and then he sees like his father, Bhai Kulwant Singh, is like being brutally tortured, and like Bhai Kulwant Singh's fully in Chardi Kala, and he's got like what, 5 rupaye, like not even that, like, you know, a coin in his pocket, and he gives it to his son, and he says like, you know, go get yourself something, and he's
like tell your mom to stay in Chardi Kala, and he couldn't even stand up because his legs were broken. And then he saw that his son was afraid of the police officers because the police officers didn't want him to send a message to the Singhs. So they stood really close to him. You should cut this bit out. And then he said...
no, it's good, man. This is the reality, though. This is like how much the impact that the Shaheed has, like decades later. Imagine the environment then when you're hearing about like Sati Singhs, like Kulwant Singh Nago ke huni, where he says to his son, "You're the munda darda police wale to," and he says, "Put ena kol nahi darida hunda, ye sadde to darde hai." Like when his sareer is like broken like that, you know, and he sees his bachcha. So, and you see, like, you hear so many of these stories from like the Singhs and the Singhniya. One of the what their relationship was and how the Chardi Kala their spirit was.
But they had so much clarity because his Singhni said that Paisab used to say that and at any point it's going to be recalled and I'll give Shiddi for it. And she said, like, well, where do you get this from? And he used to say that there's going to be a time when I'm Shaheed, that Sangatane Sukhdevno, they're going to hold him on stage. They're going to hold him on stage and say, Kulwant Singh da Pajangiya. And then later on at his Barasi, like there's a picture of Sant Ji holding him. And Sant Ji says on the speech, he says that Sukhdev Singh is the same age as Baba Zorawar Singh, and he was the same way Banda Singh took Badala. And whenever Zire de Chatti de Kore Nangai, he goes, Ednavi, those people who did this will pay the same price. And in relation to that, like about six individuals were assassinated.
Including Bachana DSP.
Yeah.
Including Bachana DSP.
Including police officers. So you see from like the Nirankari time where, you know, it's not an open attack here. Like Sikhs are going to that Vaisakhi, Nagar Kirtan, the Julus that the Nirankaris are taking out, and the police is firing upon them. And then following that, like how everything changes, and then following the funeral in particular, the Sikhs start organizing now in a different way. And then you see, you know, the assassinations occurring, and then open encounters with the police that you see in the Heru, and then like the targeting, like abducting of particular Naujawan that they see as like, oh, this is someone's instigating, someone's in a position of leadership, we can get information from them, let's abduct them, let's move around from police stations, let's torture them. And you see, this is what we see from 1978 to like 1982, that whole pattern is now going to be repeated as a tactic on a massive scale all across Punjab, and it's going to last like multiple decades. In particular, obviously, following the Darbar Sahib Hamla, that this whole thing then is given a name, Operation Woodrose, Operation Shuddhikaran, that this whole process now becomes part of the government's counter-insurgency policy, that oda vi more morte singh jawab dinde rehinde.
And I think, you know, just to summarize this episode, and I think the viewers will possibly agree that a conflict between the Sikhs and the Nirankari have turned into a conflict between India and the Sikhs. So this is a start of the Indo-Sikh war, I would like to, you know, say, to summarize the whole thing. And they have actually, as I said earlier, you know, this was now a challenge for them, that how robustly they're going to basically finish off the movement, but that didn't happen. Because we went to Dharam Yudh Morcha, and that was another level of, you know, Sikhs getting together and putting, I mean, for Sant Ji, I mean, we will talk in detail in the next episode about Dharam Yudh Morcha, but one thing is, this came into being from Sardar Kapoor Singh, and Akali Dal actually adopted that in their manifesto in 1979. However, Sant Ji officially adopted this in 82. However, this Sant Ji knew that I don't think so this is going to happen. Government is never going to agree to these demands. It was just a test to tell the public or tell the Sangat that no matter what you ask, you're not going to get nothing out of them. And even if you get, things are going to get worse and worse and worse. And that's what happened in 82 and afterwards. So, I mean, there was a full-on civil disobedience. There was a full-on morcha. There was a lot of griftariyan, a lot of political back and forth between the demands, between the Indira Gandhi and the Akali Dal. A lot happened. But then does that justify that this moved from political, political dispute to what happened in 84, which is Kallukara, and they mark it as Operation Blue Star. So I think Sangat needs to decide how, they will be the judge of it at the end of the third podcast, as to how a movement for our rights and a movement for our defense was marked as something outlawed, or was marked as something related to terrorism, and that becomes now the foundation of today's Sangharsh that we're still in. So this war is not over yet, if you know what I mean. When we talk about Anglo-Sikh dispute, I mean, that is still occurring at some level, or Mughal and Sikh disputes, what we talked about in the first episode. Those wars, but this war is still ongoing. It's still happening. I mean, we've just had an assassination on Canadian soil, So this is still ongoing, and I think we'll discuss in more depth within the next episode.
And this kind of period comes to an end when Sant Jarnail Singh moves from the headquarters of Taksal to Darbar Sahib. And that's a really important moment, because when Sant Ji moves to Darbar Sahib, that's where all of the morche for the Panth have been for. And like that, the discourse about like rights and justice is really interesting, because Sant Jarnail Singh takes the Qawm through this process of understanding what that actually means, and the morcha moves from these particular key kind of like battlegrounds over like the Tarmiyud Morcha and like the rights and autonomy and religious rights and linguistic rights, into this out and out position of sovereignty and Padshahi dwara qaim karni hai. And as Sant Ji's famous like bachana jado Darbar Sahib de char dwari ch fauj audi udo Khalistan di nee rakhi jaugi, and they're pointing in a very particular direction, where we kind of start the galbat about like Shaheedi being a Ra, Shaheedi being a Juggat, a technique, a method through which the Panth exists and furthers its hond hasti, it rejuvenates its spirit, jado dolda khun Shaheed dada, and we're going to see that whole thing now unfold. And an individual like Sant Ji, Bhai Fauja Singh Ji, they saw this trajectory, from early kind of 70s, like this is the direction it's going to go in.
So in this whole podcast so far, and we've been speaking about the speeches at Manji Sahib, Sant Ji this whole time has not been staying at the Darbar Sahib.
No, he's been at Taksal, he's been at Gurdwara Gurdarshan Prakash at Mehta. That's the headquarters of Damdami Taksal, and that's their Jummewari. And they're kind of forced into this position of a Gawai of the Panth, and they essentially become the de facto leader of the. They've never been given this Odda Padvi of like Jathedari of the Panth, but essentially it's arguable that that's the role that they fulfill through this crucial kind of moment. And then their shift to Darbar Sahib again is a very purposeful move.
And I thought that was important to highlight, because people might not realize, like we've done in this whole podcast, is all the events that have taken place, they're not even in the Darbar Sahib yet. So it's all like the build up towards that, which we can speak about in the next podcast. And one thing that we didn't really touch upon was that Nampur Sahib resolution. Is that something we're going to take into next podcast?
It's a bit more relevant to the
yeah. So just in terms of timeline, we didn't mention that, but it's fine because we can carry that on into next podcast. Is there any final points to add to this podcast, or are we leaving it here that at the start of the next podcast, and for the viewers, are we speaking about now Sant Ji moving towards the Darbar Sahib and the Taramiyud Morcha and so on? Tika, that's fine. So thank you so much again to all the Gurmukhs here today for sharing, all the knowledge and your experiences when it comes to this certain time period. Today, in this podcast, we focus mainly on 1978, coming up to 1983, 1982, 1981. And next podcast, we're going to more detail on the Saka of 1984. What we're also going to do, and I've been to the Sangha, like we said in the last podcast, if you have any questions, if you have any comments, please leave in the comment section. And what we'd like to do is that after the fourth podcast, the aftermath of 1984 June, we'll have a special podcast, more of a Q&A. So all the questions that you guys ask, we spoke earlier about, is Sant Ji a part of Congress? All these different, things that people bring up. they can all be answered in detail. So again, this is your opportunity to ask those questions, and they can be answered in a special Q&A that we'll do afterwards if you guys said enough comments and questions. But again, thank you to the Gurumukhs, and we'll finish off here. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.